21st.
Tony, you need to hit the gavel.
Think so?
Yeah.
I'm not a gavel guy. So I'm calling to order this meeting of the regularly scheduled board meeting of North County Transit District for February 21, 2019. Anthony, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Jack Feller. Here. Tony Krantz.
Here.
John Franklin. Paul McNamara. Here. Jim Desmond. Here. Dave Drucker.
Here.
Jewel Edson.
Here.
Sharon Jenkins.
Here.
Priya Patel.
Here.
Thank you. And if you'd rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now hear a safety briefing and evacuation procedures from Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board.
Sir. In the event of emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of evacuation, please do so using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once outside, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by personnel. We have fire extinguishers on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator on the first floor. Staff on hand training. That includes myself.
Okay, thank you. And Anthony, are there any changes to the agenda? All right, that brings us to oral communication. And we have one speaker for oral communication, Cindy Rocco.
Cindy Rocco. I live in South Oceanside, and I just wanted to share my experience as a user of the bus system. And if I want to plan well, there's some issues that the stops, it'll be 2 buses at one time. And I'm only traveling 3 miles here or less. And then there's no bus stops. I've had buses drive by me, like literally, and a guy who's driving a Carlsbad picked me up so I could go to the mall. So, but anyway, and there's also really horrible lighting out at the transit center. And I don't know if it has to do with how the trees are being groomed, but I know the lights are there, but it is so dark. I know they're managing the homeless as well. I mean, I say hi to them all the time, but they do collect at that alley as well. And my concern is there's going to be a new restaurant in the old Union Tribune building, and that's right between that alley and then over a block. And so once that's going to be, I think, a higher quality restaurant. And if you want tourists to be attracted to that, and I'm just concerned also because we are pushing from the pier because we don't want tourists to see, and then neighborhoods are getting them down in the San Luis Rey. I mean, they tell me that this is what's, happening. So I just wanted to give feedback on that just from my perspective. Oh, and if I want to go to the pharmacy and the bank, I have to plan almost 3-4 hours. I can't just go run and do an errand. It's kind of crazy. And I can't go to Walmart without walking and transferring, and Chamber of Commerce is a mile up the road from this center. So, but anyway, it's just feedback for you. Thank you very much for listening.
Could we have staff take a look at the lighting at the North County at the Oceanside Transit Center? Okay, thanks.
Staff will follow up. Thank you. All right, next, do I have a motion to approve the minutes for the regular board meeting of January 17th of 2019?
So moved.
So,
Jack.
Jewel.
Second. Not working.
Seems to be unhappy.
Number 1, yes.
It's got an error message of some sort.
I did the only number.
It should be lighting up, right? Once we, yeah, it's not working.
Should we try a roll call vote?
Still roll call vote.
We'll do a roll call vote.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Jack Beller, seconded by Board Member Joel Essence to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on January 17th, 2019. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes with all board members present, voting yes.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to the consent calendar, items 1 through 12.
I would move approval.
Motion by Drucker, second by Edson. Roll call vote.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Drucker, seconded by Board Member Joel Essence to approve consent items 1 through 12. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes with all board members present, voting yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to other business items. Number 13, Jacob Gould will be, Senior Legal Counsel will review item 13.
Good afternoon. Okay, so this is proposed changes to ordinance number 3, specifically relating to, there we go. So ordinance number 3 establishes all the rules and regulations for the district. Pretty much everything that can and cannot occur on our modes, facilities, and property. Also establishes arrest and citations for authorized personnel. Specifically, what we're going to be talking about today is bicycles on NCTD modes. We recognize that quite a bit of our riders utilize bicycles to assist them in first and last mile. We provide for bicycle transportation on Breeze, Flex, Sprinter, and Coaster. And we are committed to that. We do realize that there are some things that we can improve upon, and that's what this ordinance is about. We've received feedback from both internal and external stakeholders regarding the policy on bicycles was insufficient when we get into contact with crowded trains, both Sprinter and Coaster. Specifically, those Sprinter and Coaster patrons expressed concerns on the number of bicycles and locations of attempted storage on those two different modes. In order to provide guidance, we have updated ordinance number 3, and that's the proposal that's in front of you today with regard to storage and boarding on Sprinter and Coaster. So currently we have this one sentence in ordinance 3 that basically bicycles are permitted. They have to be secured in tie downs, and they can't block aisles or doorways. And so we just had too many on some of the crowded modes, especially on Sprinter. And so this is the proposed revision. I know it's a lot of red, but we've added in some significant, what we think are improvements. First, we've added that bicycles can't be left unattended. That's so that if we do need somebody to move or somebody to relocate that they are there and available to move that bicycle. We've kept the, in no event can they block the doorways, and we've added some additional guidance in terms of impeding the preferred seating or wheelchair accessibility areas, and that they do have to be moved or relocated upon any direction by our authorized enforcement personnel. So that could be an operator, conductor, or any of our TAs. And if they are left unsecured or unattended, that they can be subject to removal if we do run into a problem there. And so this is pretty much the entirety of the proposed change to ordinance number 3. It's in section 2.2.a.8. And we have a black line there. To give you an example of what we're talking about, on the coaster here, we have several bikes in the proper location. There are bicycle tie downs there. That one would be in compliance. Here on the Sprinter, this one needs a little bit of improvement. It's not totally in the area. It's not tied down. On the Sprinter, we are going to be limited to 5 bicycles. There are essentially 5 tie downs in all of the cars. On the coaster, depending on which car you're in and how many cars are in the consist, that will change. Some there are multitudes, some there are designated wheelchair spaces. So that will be a little bit different on the coaster. We did get, let's see, we'll go into this one before we get into the questions. But on the Sprinter and Coaster, again, they have designated tie downs. These are the only areas where they can be placed. You're not going to be able to take it upstairs on the coaster. Can't take it with you on the Sprinter. It needs to remain in place. They are limited by the restraining tie downs. Again, on the Sprinter, that's 5. It's going to vary by coaster. They can't impede passenger walkways, wheelchair accessibility where those areas are shared. Wheelchair and passengers will have the right of way. and they can't be left unattended. We did get one question, basically related to what does unattended mean? Does that mean that I can't use the restroom? If you're on the Sprinter, please don't use the restroom. There isn't one there. If you're on the coaster, that's totally fine. You can go to the bathroom. What we're talking about here is if one of our authorized personnel is requesting that one of these be moved, that person is available. If they go down 2 cars to meet up with some friends and there's nobody there to take care of that bicycle, then that is going to be subject to removal. In the same ordinance, and has been there since the beginning, our designated staff is authorized to use discretion when we apply these. So if somebody goes upstairs to say hello, or if they go to the restroom, we're not going to be removing a bicycle. But if nobody's available for 45 minutes while we're trying to relocate that will be a problem. So that is the entirety of the change as recommended. There's 4 parts to this because this is a public hearing. Receive the proposed modifications, waive the full reading of the ordinance, receive public comment, close the public hearing, and then adopt the proposed modifications to ordinance number 3, the staff's recommendation. I'm here for any questions you may have.
Thank you. I don't have any public speakers, so does the board have any questions or comments? Vice Chair Feller.
What happens if somebody gets on early in the trip with a bicycle and all of a sudden a load of a number of people get on that are disabled or need the access or the places that they're placing the chairs? How does that work?
We cannot require anybody to move them, but we can ask, and it's the same on all of our modes. So essentially, if there is no space there, we will ask those bicycle patrons to move those bicycles if we have space. If we don't, essentially it's the same as a full train and no seats, and we'll do our best to accommodate those in any manner we can, but we can't tell somebody you have to move your bicycle or get off the train so that another patron can get on.
Okay.
Board Member Druker first.
Is there any way to be less ambiguous about unattended? I'm just a little bit worried that, we may get into some fights, well, yeah, I was just upstairs for 5 minutes and actually the person was gone, totally, unattended. Is there any way to be somewhat more specific, rather? Something.
Yeah, we looked at that when we got the comment. It's going to be difficult, especially on if somebody gets on at one station and off at another. That may only be a 5-minute trip. And this is where we've left it to the discretion of the enforcement personnel who's actually on the train. We can take a look at potentially modifying that, but we felt that adding in an additional restriction may complicate the enforcement of this. And the intent is really, if the bicycle is causing harm, is fallen over, is in the aisle, that's going to be moved. Removing this is going to be a last ditch effort. That's going to be when we leave Oceanside, we're heading up to Stewart Mesa. Nobody's gotten that bike. We're going to pull that off the train. So we've looked into it. I haven't seen any other ordinances like this that have sort of like if it's left unattended for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that it's then removed. They've pretty much left it up to the discretion of the enforcement personnel. But if there are any other examples, I'd be happy to look at them.
Board Member Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 5 seems like a small number for the Sprinter. Is that the max that can be carried on the Sprinter, 5 bikes?
Right now, that's the maximum number of tie downs we have that fit that designated space so they don't impede the aisle.
And so if somebody gets on and all the spaces are tied up, they sit down, they're holding on to their bicycle or something next to their seat. They got to get off at the next stop, technically.
It's going to be up to the enforcement personnel.
So in coordination with implementing this ordinance, one of the projects that we're working on with Sandag is bike lockers, and being able to better transition people to last mile without their bikes, i.e. scooters and other things. So we've looked at it every different way that we can. We want people to be able to bring their bikes on, but there's obviously going to have to be some limitations.
Some limitations.
So
yeah.
Sandag is, I don't know if they've advanced it yet, but the first step is they're going to do a survey. We have significantly a need of a survey to make sure we have a good understanding of exactly what the Sprinter riders are doing. And then we're looking at infrastructure improvements in terms of additional bike lockers on the Sprinter, but we're also looking at some things that we can do relative to first and last mile so that you can leave your bike at a station and then be able to have a scooter or a bike at the terminal location.
Okay. It just seems like on the weekends and things, it just seems like and maybe that's the right number. I don't know if 5
No.
is the magic number, if that's not enough on the weekends or it is enough. I don't
So
know.
it's right now, the number is just driven by the available space.
Yeah.
So part of the secondary overhaul of the Sprinter Overhaul 2, which has not begun, we have a task for the consultant to look if we can reconfigure the Sprinter in the future so that we can accommodate more bikes, but we're not at this point now. That will be years away in terms of reconfiguration.
Any other comments? All right, and I would be looking for a motion to close the public hearing and approve the agenda item 13.
So moved.
Second.
We doing roll call or are we going to try the buttons here? All right, on a motion by,
On the motion of Board Member Joe Edson, second by Board Member Paul McNamara, to close the public hearing and approve agenda item number 13. All those in favor?
aye.
Motion passes by board members present.
Very good, thank you. All right, moving on to informational items 14 through 18. Executive Director Tucker.
Yes. So we have Caltrans has graciously come in to give us a presentation today. It's Ann Fox, she's Deputy for Planning, and Alan Kossop, who is the Corridor Director for the SR 76 I-5 Corridor Project. Just to set the table for this, this is going to be the kickoff of a series of presentations that we as NCTD staff want to provide to the board to kind of reaffirm transportation planning process. So the next presentation after this will be about our planning process and the service standards that we have. One of the things I know that I'm focused on is making sure we give a proper framework about when we talk about projects, how they should be thought about. Right now, I hear a lot of discussion of people defining the project without first thinking about what is the purpose and need, and the traditional planning process that we should go through to look at our transportation toolbox to identify the right tool. So I think this presentation, I've seen it, it's an excellent presentation, sets the table really well for that type of discussion, and will be informative for you all as board members, particularly when you're here or at Sandag, to understand more of the framework and the context of much of what you hear regarding transportation program processes and procedures. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ann.
Great, thank you. And in conclusion, yeah, we'll, no. So again, we appreciate the ask and the offer to come here and provide information on our planning process. Once again, I'm Ann Fox. I'm the Caltrans District 11 Deputy for Planning and Local Assistance, and I'll be tag teaming this presentation with our Corridor Director, Alan Kossop, back here. He's Corridor Director for I-5 and 78. So again, thank you for having us here. There we go. For those who may not be familiar with Caltrans and our district, I thought I'd just put up this slide and give a little bit of information. Here in San Diego, there's 12 districts within Caltrans. The San Diego region is part of District 11. That encompasses both San Diego and Imperial counties. We have approximately 1,200 employees that cover 4,200 lane miles out there. This encompasses 4 interstate highways, 22 state highways, and as you're driving along and you look left and right, that's 3,000 acres of landscape also that we're maintaining. We also have within our jurisdiction 4 rest areas, 26 strategically located maintenance stations for our crews, and we also have 61 park and ride lots, also conveniently located there for our carpoolers, van poolers, next to transit stops. We actually own and operate about half of those. Others are within local jurisdictions. Oh, let me go back one there. So what is our role in developing projects? Caltrans is the owner-operator of the state highway system, so we have the obligation to ensure that any projects are done in a safe and maintainable way. We want to make sure that those projects and our roadways are efficient in the movements of goods and people. And of course, any projects are developed, funded, and constructed with a strong partnership focus. Considerable planning is performed by Caltrans local agencies and jointly before projects are even initiated. What we have in California, our state planning document, is the California Transportation Plan. This is branded as the CTP 2040. This is a long-range plan that defines our goals, policies, and strategies to achieve our collective vision for the transportation network. This effort very closely models our region's RTP plan. And in fact, Caltrans and your district's missions align very closely as far as providing a safe, sustainable, integrated, efficient transportation system. So we're very much in alignment with that planning. Our transportation planning is continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive. It's the responsibilities of both our regional partners and the state through the California Transportation Plan to work together. So many of those projects that are developed locally through, for example, the transit districts are fed into the RTP. The RTP then provides inputs over to the CTP, of which then those outputs shape the direction, the integration. They provide for better delivery of our projects and better use of our resources. I know there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of words that can't be read clearly. I can't read them from here. But what I wanted to do was just to show, represent that there is a project flow or process flow from planning to programming. As we highlight this area here in this lavender color, so that's the planning, essentially the planning part of this section. So again, with our state level CTP, our California 2040 plan, that is fed and provides inputs, outputs to the regional plans. The CTP is really just the umbrella. It provides a strategic framework for the plans. The regional plans are fed by your local projects, your local strategic initiatives. What are your priorities? Also coming into play here, this kind of more colorful box here is that, again, our planning is not done in a vacuum. There are several modal inputs too that provide input. Within there's the state aviation plan, freight plan, transit plan. There's our bike and ped, our state bike and ped plan. Again, these inputs feed this greater framework, this umbrella, to make sure that those projects, those strategies that we hope to implement and provide for a statewide vision, that they work with each other, that they're integrated. Are we doing our best use of resources? Are we being efficient with our plans through there? Once we leave that planning part of this slide, that's when we shift over into more of a programming. So how do we set ourselves up to then get dollars on projects? So again, in the planning process, you're identifying projects, you're identifying priorities. As such, when you want to move into the planning process, and this applies to our state projects, we put together reports, these planning documents. You may have heard them called PSR, project study reports, or planning project initiation documents, PID documents. What those are, essentially, we're trying to outline a range of feasible alternatives, right? What are some projects that we can move forward to chase funding on these? From there, essentially, it goes into different types of programs. You may have heard then of SHOP programs, so these operational improvements, the STIP program, the State Transportation Improvement Program. Within there's dollars split for state projects to regional projects. Again, federal dollars are funded through federal programs. Here locally, we have local measure programs that allow for projects to move forward with funding. But again, just trying to illustrate that as we move from a planning into a programming, once we have dollars realized on a project. Funding's not unlimited, right? So it is a matter of balancing our priorities. So as we look at this and under the overarching mission to provide mobility for all travelers, we really need to ensure that those processes, plans, projects that we're moving forward are done safely, that we're providing the safest transportation system in the nation for users and workers, that we're able to maintain and preserve our existing system or fix it first. We want to make sure we can maximize our interregional mobility. For us, for the state, Caltrans, that means interregional is more of those longer range trips. So those are 100-mile plus trips, those longer trips. We also want to make sure that what we put forward supports goods movements and that we're doing these in a sustainable way. Again, we're balancing those first four priorities with, of course, looking at our local needs here, our regional needs with system performance. Are we addressing congestion? How are we looking at moving people locally? What's the mobility here? So getting to that, this is just a little bit background of where we live and work. The yellow or orange represents currently where we live. These are our housing areas. The blue dots represent our job centers. And we really don't have a job center. We're spread throughout the region. So you can see that we have up here on the 78 corridor, we then Serrano Valley, Kearney Mesa, downtown, National City, and to a smaller extent down here in Otay Mesa. So looking at where housing and jobs are projected to grow, we're essentially still within that westerly third of the county. Again, you're seeing growth areas along the 78 corridor here, Serrano Valley, and most notably here in the Otay Mesa region. So putting it all together, it's seems to be fitting all within our current footprint. Again, densifying within that westerlymost areas of our region. And what this is saying that is that the existing infrastructure, our current highway network, will still need to remain the backbone of how we're moving people between where they live and where they work. So on this slide, I'm showing the areas of jobs and where we live a little differently, still represented by the purple, blue, and the yellows for where we live. And then I've layered on there our highway network. And don't know that if you can tell from here, but it's in varying shades of red. Essentially, it's showing that even today with this network, there's congestion. And this is beginning to be no longer just that commute congestion, those morning peaks, afternoon peaks, but we're seeing those peak periods extended several more hours during the day. And instead of just on the weekdays, we're seeing that also on the weekends. So in regards to that, and knowing that, you know, that the old saying, you can't just build yourself out of congestion, there are going to be times where we do need to increase capacity on our highway network. But we do need to be more flexible with the what else is. What more could we be doing? How can we better optimize our existing assets and better influence our travel demand on the transportation system? So we're trying to look then at our network as being a flexible transportation corridors. So kind of looking at a larger footprint, spatial footprint in our mind. So that's including being inclusive of not just the highway, but we have adjacent transit, rail, bike and ped improvements, but considering that all a corridor, and how can we then best optimize those in there. So we're depicting here that it's going to take layers, right? So there's going to be elements of technology that we can implement on our highways to better move our flow. Ride sharing, there's going to be dynamic signing, being able to better influence mode shifts with managed lanes or HOVs. Again, figuring out what more we can do with our existing infrastructure and just being more efficient with what we're doing. So with that, I'll tag in Alan Kossup. He'll talk a little bit more about what we are doing, taking some sample corridors of where we are finding ways to be more multimodal and more efficient in our mobility. So with that, there you go.
Thank you, Ann. And I equivocate the layers to the comment about tools in the toolbox. And the idea here is you really want to come up with one vision for these transportation corridors that are a mix of technology and modes, active transportation, transit, rail. And this isn't new to San Diego. You know, probably prior to the mid-2000s, we planned and implemented projects separately without a lot of discussion among each of the agencies. In the mid-2000s, I-15 was really the first example in San Diego where we started moving away from that, right? Where our Caltrans project to add express lanes enabled MTS to put BRT on there, right? We needed a congestion-free lane so that BRT was a good option. And so we started having that synergy, and that's the beginning of a layer there, right? There's a transit layer and a highway layer together. Another example on I-15 is we implemented policy layers, right? So we have congestion pricing in that corridor. It's not just a general free-for-all general purpose lane. We have movable barriers. So we're actually managing demand via policy. And so that's an example of how we've segued from this sort of siloed approach, each agency developing a plan, their own independent plan, to more of a blended, unified plan for the corridor. Each corridor is different, right? Each corridor has different needs, different customers, different employers, where the houses are. So the selection of those tools in the toolbox to develop the vision for each corridor is going to be different. It's not a one size fits all. On the North Coast corridor, we sort of took the ideas of how the process from I-15, but the answers were different, right? On I-5, it was a lot more about coastal resources. And so we have layers about environmental. And when we look here, this is San Alejo, you can see how the Losan rail line needed to be double tracked. I-5 needed an additional lane. We could have pursued those separately. As we move through the process, all the stakeholders and the partners, the cities, the resource agencies, Coastal Commission did not want that to happen, right? They wanted one comprehensive plan, get in, get out. They didn't want us to piecemeal those resources. And we heard that loud and clear. And so we came up with a vision that was a blended vision, right? And so you've probably seen the umbrella before. And the idea basically is at the end of the day, the I-5 improvement is both Losan and 5 and active transportation and environmental, signified by the 3 colors. It's a $6 billion vision. Since the region doesn't have $6 billion in the bank account, it's spread out over 40 years. And so based on revenue, but not only revenue, based on need, and based on, the good thing about these visions is they can be flexible and react to changes in land use, changes in technology, changes in transportation. We all know it's very difficult to predict exactly where we're headed in transportation 20 years from now. So not building it all at one time gives us chances every few years to kind of come back to the vision and say, is that the right vision? And so, moving forward, we know that there's, over the last 5-6 years, new challenges. There's always new challenges hitting a region. Reduced revenue, prices of projects are coming up. And we've talked about technology, right? Uber and Lyft, the idea how that could help us in the first mile, last mile, was not thought about 5, 6, 7 years ago. The importance of VMT was not thought about 10 years ago. So those are examples of how the visions need to be reactive to those changes. The good news is, as Ann pointed out, we've got a good infrastructure to start from, right? We've got a good base. The region has grown up around these transportation corridors, your corridors, our corridors, and they're not to be abandoned. The question is, how do we maximize and how do we change those corridors to reflect today's demands? This shows you your network. Don't need to go through that specifics, but on the I-5, and what these are from is the region's RTP, right? So the region's RTP, 2015-16 was last updated. Every 4 years, it gets a chance to reevaluate. Given all those changes that have happened to us over the last 4 years, we can bring a different blend of projects. We can reprioritize projects. When you look at just the freeway components in the RTP, what we've got in the current RTP, the existing RTP, right? We're building 1 lane in each direction on I-5 right now, 1 lane. The ultimate vision's 2 lanes in each direction as an express lane. Those second lanes in the RTP are towards the back end of the RTP, 2030, 2035. Same idea over on 78, but it's 1 lane in each direction in the RTP. And so as we go back to those changes and influencers that are hitting us, we need to sort of reevaluate those things. And looking at I-5, it's a good example. We're building 1 lane in each direction. Our models show that we need 2 lanes in each direction. A model's a forecast. A lot could change, but also technology. Maybe we do ultimately need 2 lanes in each direction, but maybe we don't need to build our way out of it. Maybe we can do that via technology and change the density of cars or how cars drive. And so I think that's one reason why we'd like to stay the course on 5 and watch how it performs over time. As we get to 78, probably the original thought had you asked Caltrans a few years ago, again, part of that get in, get out. Let's try to build the express lanes from one end of the corridor to the other end of the corridor as one big project. Revenue shows that that's probably may not be practical. As we go and look at the modeling, maybe it's not even needed. Really, the biggest problem that's happening out there is on the east end of the 78 corridor. Congestion's a significant problem, some of the worst in the county. So if we're going to take our limited funds, we would recommend headed towards the east of the corridor and it basically extending the express lanes that you see on I-15 and extending them about 2 miles on 78 to the west, and then adding new express lane connectors there. At the same time, we want to revision the middle, work on the west, but there's also operational improvements to remove bottlenecks in the middle. If we can't afford one additional lane the entire 17 miles, maybe there's aux lanes that we can extend between interchanges, which free up some of that congestion. So again, those operational improvements could be a layer. And you know, the idea is here we work together to try to figure out these visions. The agencies work together. State of California has implemented you know, different tools to do that. One of them is a systems management plan, which the CTC actually requires now to be competitive for state funds, because they want to see that the agencies are working together on a blended vision. So that is kind of the minimum to get into the game these days, to be competitive with the other counties and cities. You know, very hard infographic to read, but here's the thought. I think people think that we need to find one solution to a transportation corridor and it's going to stick for 40 years. And there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. We think of it as more of an evolving corridor sort of idea. And that corridor involves you, it involves us, it involves bikes. And as technology changes, it's okay for every 4 years to reevaluate that vision and make tweaks in it. What we know, you know, like on I-5 and 78, we need to add some additional capacity. We need to do that in a managed way, express lanes, carpools, BRTs. But beyond that, we want to keep our options open, and we want to build stuff that can be consistent with that ultimate option, and so that we're not throwing things away, but ultimately the service that fits on that infrastructure can change. And you know, maybe it's crowdsourced transit, maybe it could be a whole lot of things that we're not willing or ready to commit exacting what those visions are. So that's why I think it's important that people think of the visions as evolving, and we do get a chance every 4 years. And as you guys mentioned, they're bottoms up visions, right? And that bottoms up vision needs to take into account where jobs are happening, how residents are changing, and how technology is changing people's demands for transportation. So with that, we think it's an exciting time to be in transportation. It's exciting because, you know, the future is kind of uncharted. We get to define that, and we get to define that by working together. And we at the state of California really, you know, appreciate your partnership, and we want to be at the table to be a part of that vision making. Questions?
Thank you. Yes, I have no public speakers, so any questions from the board? Board Member Jenkins?
I have a question for you, not directly related to transit, but all of our cities have ramps that go onto the freeways, whether it's the 78, the 15, or the 5. And I think Ann mentioned about the freeways continue to be the backbone, and mentioned about elements of technology are improving. One of the challenges we have is your ramp signals, because we don't control those in our cities. So what is your technology that you're working on to help us so we can all talk with your ramp signals?
Great question. One of the things that is in our technology layer is the idea of adaptive signals. We're trying to modernize, right, some of our controllers for a lot of good reasons, consistency statewide, indemnification issues. They're consistent throughout the state. Every city has the exact same controller. We're recognizing that maybe we need to make some tweaks to that approach and use more adaptive signals. They're not a solution at every location, but depending on the characteristics of the cross streets, that's an area that we're piloting. We've done some pilots with the city of San Diego, and some of our projects, we've added budget for that. Also different V2X sort of applications that we can use to better communicate to the cars and have the cars connected and platoon better. Honestly, that's one of the things that we see as a opportunity on the freeway ultimately, is if you can get the cars to talk to each other, you can actually sort of reduce their headway and you get more cars, because our vision is not moving more cars necessarily, it's moving more people. And whether that's on the NCTD modes or whether that's in cars, it doesn't really matter to us, but technology allows those vehicles to do that. And so I think the same thing is true with the ramp meters.
Yeah, I think even just before we get to the cars talking, it'd be nice just to get our signals talking.
I agree with that.
How many years out are we from that?
The adaptive signals, I mean, we're open to having those conversations now with the
Okay.
cities. As part of I-5 and 78, we have money budgeted for that. Again, it's not on every ramp. I don't think it's going to work on every ramp, but there are opportunities.
So who would the cities contact if they wanted to talk to?
In the case of 78 or 5, it would be me.
Okay,
It's a good starting point.
thanks.
Alan, I didn't put her up to that. He and I have exchanged emails on this very subject here
I bet all
recently,
of us
so,
have.
I bet that they should get it sometime.
yeah.
They should what? Get it?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Feller.
Thanks, Alan. You're getting smoother as you
Get older.
age, like fine wine. I've watched you for a long time, but can you tell us all where your pots of money are? What makes up your pots of money? Because I know, well, we've seen some rainbows, but I've been all over the county looking for the end of it.
So interestingly enough, probably in the late 90s, most of those pots in terms of capacity increasing projects, whether they be transit or highways, was moved to the regions. The prioritization, the programming of those projects rest with SANDAG. So 75% of the capacity increasing programs like the STIP are programmed through SANDAG. 25%, as Ann talked about, when we talk about long range trips like better connecting LA and San Diego, we do have money to deal with some of those trips, and we put some of that money on the Losan rail line. We also put some of it on 5. Most of it actually probably on the freeways go to rural areas like Bakersfield and connecting Bakersfield to San Francisco and so forth, Imperial County, places that don't get enough money on their own. They don't have a sales tax to move the needle to make a mobility improvement. So that 25% goes there. The Fix It First money that Ann was talking about, a lot of that money is now coming through SB1, the increase on the gas tax. And so you are seeing a lot more asset management projects. We have a big $100 million one coming to 78. We can do some operational improvements, auxiliary lanes, some ITS improvements in that bucket. There are also a number of competitive programs that came out of SB1, and you're competing with other projects throughout the state. One example of that is Solutions for Congested Corridors, which was a program that we received $195 million on I-5 in the last go around. That allowed us to extend those carpool lanes to 78, and that's what we're working on now. But the Annie to get into that game really was a blended solution, having a strategy that incorporates all of the modes. And so that was one reason why we did well in that category.
So mostly you're talking about sales tax dollars that are funding all of this in some form or fashion.
So the 75% that I talked about, there is state and federal funds that flow through the state to SANDAG for their programming. So that's the STIP. There's formula federal funds that go right to the regions, STP and CMAQ. And then, of course, Transnet would be the third.
Board Member Edson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. Under the where we live and work, the slides that were around 19, 20, 21, where we live and work, projected housing and job growth, and the existing and projected growth. I think, Ann, you mentioned that primarily forecasting growth around the west I-5 coastal corridor, and then also 78 and Otay areas. But I noticed that there's quite a bit of blue still in the projecting and existing in the 2018 to 2050 in the Sorrento Valley, Sorrento Mesa, Torrey Pines Mesa, UTC area.
Yes, there definitely is. And I for purposes of discussion, just kind of wanted to highlight some of the newer areas, or we're seeing kind of that larger growth, and then specifically in the Otay Mesa region. That's why I had called that out. But definitely along the 78 corridor, and of course our technology hub of Sorrento Valley, still seeing much more growth within there. Yeah.
There's a lot of density and increasing density there. I'm there pretty frequently. I live in not too far away. And of course, I go by every Friday on the way to Sandag and see all of the growth that's happening with high-rise towers of buildings, which is creating a lot more density.
Yeah, and I think part of that is right for the region and the land use authorities. What you are seeing is the development of plans that do have more of the densifying of those areas. Again, sticking within that western third of San Diego County. So just working on those infills or those density, those creating higher densities within those areas.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple more questions if I could. So the 2050 transit network graphic that you showed us, the 2050 revenue constrained, it's I think that one. No. Okay, go back. I think that has the fuzzy little ones, right? Yeah, revenue constrained transit network. Is that one?
Yes.
Okay, so it talks about a trolley, or it shows a trolley sprinter that goes to maybe Del Mar Heights Road kind of area. It shows toll lanes, additional lanes on the next page, toll lanes in the managed lanes and the highway network. Curious to hear a little bit more about those.
So, oh, yeah, I was just going to say, so again, this is pulling from the Sandex regional plan, right? And the 2050 look, and as far as of projects that are on here, so we have again the vision by 2050, the double tracking of the Los San corridor in there, the Sprinter Express and extension to Westfield, North County, new trolley projects, PB to Grossmont, Kearney Mesa, Carmel Valley, connecting SDSU to downtown. There are also several proposed BRT lines, so bus rapid transit, also within this plan, and other rapid bus services.
So you had mentioned that on I-5 corridor that you're building a single managed lane in each direction. That's an additional single managed lane, correct? Well, parts of it. So will we have one, or will we have two all the way up?
So in the project you see under construction right now, the
Build
idea is to
NCC?
extend the ones that are in Solana Beach, one lane each direction, all the way to 78. I have enough money for that. I plan to be out by 2021, complete all the way to 78 by 2021.
Okay, and then for the future,
To 78.
is the idea, I had heard a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago or sooner, that the idea in the future as transit increases and frequency increases, that rather than building more managed lanes, as you spoke about, maybe changes in technology of actually repurposing some of the existing unmanaged lanes, I hate to call them that. Is that something that's under consideration still?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this infographic is trying to sort of communicate that. As, for example, as connected vehicles became more prevalent, you could convert more of the general purpose lanes and manage them to just to connected vehicles. Or you could decide to use the existing carpool lane as a BRT lane, like we're doing in the Bay Area, in the South Bay. It's just a question of how the demand changes, and is there enough ridership to trigger that? A good example of that, right? When we started construction 3 years ago on I-5, we anticipated opening those carpool lanes up as carpool lanes only. We're already starting to think about, well, maybe we should think about congestion pricing them and not just do carpooling. Haven't made a decision yet, but that's just shows you how flexible we are, because some of the carpool lanes are already full. And so, they're not really working as intended at the south end. So that's why maybe we need a new strategy there.
Okay, thank you. And my last one was a comment. I don't think this picture is the San Elijo Lagoon. I think it's something further north.
Oh,
Yeah,
I used
it's Bataquitos.
It's
Yeah, I thought it was
I'm
Bataquitos.
sorry.
No
You're right.
worries.
My
I meant-
comments still hold though.
I thought, look at all that extra parkland
Yeah,
we
you're
got.
right. You have a
Thanks.
question too?
I did want to say, you know, like on the transit vision that's in the RTP now, right? It's, you know, potential in changing approaches or strategies. The focus was always coaster. I think that's appropriate. Let's finish the double track. Let's get more frequency. Let's try to up the ridership there. You know, other corridors have BRT. How does BRT and transit work together, or rail together? That's subject to your guys' input to us, you know, and we're here to accommodate that. You know, there are pros and cons of that depending on which trips you're trying to serve first. And you know, I mean, it's just, there's an inherent tension there that is flushed out through the planning process of working together and looking at these plans. And I think when you look at the UTC area, personally, I mean, that area is already changing so much because of what Midcoast is able to do there and service. You know, I didn't think about all those cranes and high rises that are now probably not able to be done without the Midcoast project. So things that we thought 5 years ago may be different now.
Well, that kind of leads me to your comment or question about how does BRT and transit work together. Somewhere within those 2015 visions, there's also high-speed rail going down the 15, is what it looked like from something I looked at.
There was once.
Yes. Yes.
Hard for us to say.
Okay, so you don't think that it will, I think I don't know, I think everyone's trying to figure out what we're hearing from Sacramento and whether it's going to stop and start and focus more on urban areas and need and leave out the middle, or what. So anyway, that's a question for all of us to think about later. Thanks.
Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you. So I had a really quick question on, I know you mentioned looking at our vision and how we can continue to tweak that every 4 years. I guess the question is, has that been used as a best practice? And as times start to change, and it seems like things are changing quite more frequently than every 4 years, have we thought about wanting to re-envision that process and whether we'd want to look at it more frequently than every 4 years?
Developing a vision sometimes takes more than a couple of years. In terms of working all together with all the stakeholders to get consensus, I think we're always open to making adjustments. You know, scooters and that sort of thing. How do we address that and manage that better? Interestingly enough, so we built a bike path to try to connect the Sorrento Valley Transit Station to UCSD. Kids used to have to use the freeway. They were in the shoulder.
I used to attend UCSD. I can attest to that.
You were a better person than I. I would not have been one of those early adopters of a bike up that grade. And now we're already seeing some of those bike companies take advantage of that, right? So they're putting bikes at the Sorrento Valley Station and bikes at the university. And so where we built something, we didn't even see how that could be better used. I know the Sorrento Valley Station is another example of something, you know, that is in probably dire needs of revisioning. I think we could all agree on that. It needs to be moved to the left or to the right, or it's got lots of opportunity, but that opportunity depends on how we want to use it in the future and how that area around there develops. Is it an Amtrak-centric, coaster-centric, commuter-centric? What are all those things? So we need to work through that. You know, we've started that process on that station, and it's going to take some time to evolve. But so yes, we can do it more than 4 years, but a lot of times it takes us 4 years to get to agreement as a region.
Thank you. I was 5 years old in 1965 when the ribbon was cut on the 5 in my backyard. And it's kind of been fascinating to watch the work that you're doing, the improvements that are being made through Encinitas. It's the first significant change to the freeway in those 55 plus years. So it's, I think, going to make a big difference. When you look at how it was constructed originally, where they took bulldozers and just, you know, filled in the lagoons, it was a lot different times. And I appreciate all the efforts that you're making to correct some of the mistakes that may have been made back then. So the project's moving along well. I appreciate all your efforts. And Board Member Desmond.
Yeah, Alan, thanks. I got a question for you on your 2050 managed lanes and highway network plan. Yeah. I don't have numbers on my slides. I don't know what there you go. And the 2050 plan shows a 78 with managed lanes across the corridor. And then, but on your next slide, there's a corridor re-envisioning.
Right.
That I don't remember coming to a vote at Sandag, but this is no longer with managed lane down the center of it. This is managed lanes for part of it and then other fixes along the way. What is this re-envisioning?
I agree with you. We have not, there's no consensus on this vision yet. I think we, Caltrans, have been working to beginning to think like if revenue is not available, how do we get some short-term relief without the whole package? And so these are some ideas. These are options that we could present the board. But yeah, we don't mean to speak for the prioritization of the different projects.
Okay, and then where do you, I guess you talked about the east side, you're right, being more congested there at the 15 and the 78. And I noticed there you got a 2025 with little asterisks, and then the I-5 and 78 interchange also with the same dates on them. I guess it's your bubble number 1 and 3 on there. Is that for planning? Is that for, I'm just wondering what your dates mean.
So the dates in there, or the dates you see, are the current RTP adopted dates that the board has agreed to.
For start or for finish?
Generally, it's a 5-year window, so it's probably somewhere we're going to start in that 5-year window.
Okay, all right.
But the asterisk sort of denotes that, you know, the whole plan is moving and prioritizing, and in general, things seem to be slipping away from us, not advancing in general across the county. So, I mean, I think that's, we just...
Unfortunately, and even the RTP, which is mentioned, it should be updated more often, what Sandag's going to be deciding on tomorrow is to kick it down the road another 2 years. So it'll be 6 years that it's going to be looked at. So it's a, instead of being looked at more often, it's going to be, they're proposing less often, and primarily due to the revenue constraints and things like that of dollars and things have changed. So,
and
anyway.
Supervisor, if I could, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to communicate here is we don't necessarily need to wait for the vision to be fully baked because it's constantly evolving anyway, right? So there are opportunities between now and the next RTP and the RTP after that to make incremental improvements that get us all bang for our buck. And this is where we'd focus. One of the things that if we're going to plan more and work together as teams, we need to take some money off the top and start this strategic process because that takes time and it does take a little bit of money to get that going. So that's one of the things we'd propose on 7 years.
And I appreciate the interim fixes until the larger nut can be accomplished in a later date, hopefully. But I just didn't know if this re-envisioning, this is the first time I'd seen that process. So, all right, thanks.
I just wanted to say one more thing. I was 18 in 1966 when I got my first speeding ticket on Highway 5.
You're older than I am, I can tell. Yes, yes. All right, thank you both very much. I appreciate it. That's an informational item, no vote required. Next up is Tracy Foster, Chief Development Officer. She's going to do the review item number 15, the NCTD Incidental Use Request Policy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. I am joined here today with Bruce Smith, who is the principal engineer at Sandag. And I will first go through a presentation on incidental use as it relates to NCTD's policies and procedures. And then Bruce will give us an overview on regional planning review. Oops. Okay, so incidental use as defined by the FTA is the limited, authorized, non-transit use of real property and equipment. And any type of incidental use must be compatible with the approved purposes of a project and must not interfere with intended public transportation uses. This definition is what NCTD has adopted as its definition of incidental use. So some examples of incidental use that we see in NCTD's right-of-way are communication lines, electrical supply, various types of pipelines, sewer, drainage, billboards, landscaping, and it could be rail trails that we see in the various cities, as well as parking. Board policy number 11 is the real estate policy. And within that policy, it identifies incidental use of NCTD's property and that it should not interfere with any current or future transit use. Again, that aligns with the FTA definition. Any incidental use is directed by our executive director in accordance with Board Policy 11, as well as Administrative Policy and Procedure, DSD, for Development Services Division 4000. I'll speak a little bit more on that in just another slide. Incidental use has to be at fair market value or charge the appropriate fees under the board-approved fee schedule. It can be waived for a city or a public agency, providing, however, that an equivalent reciprocal benefit is provided to NCTD. Any exceptions to fair market value or variance from the board-approved fee schedule does require the board's approval. The incidental use shall also require that whoever is requesting that incidental use, that they're responsible for any relocation costs in order to accommodate any of NCTD's uses or activities. These types of provisions are included in all of our agreements. And it also requires any reimbursement of costs that NCTD incurs in processing that request. So that can be staff time, it can be appraisal costs or survey costs. So a little bit about the administrative policy and procedure. This was adopted in 2014, and it provides a little more guidance and is procedural in nature, guiding staff on how to process incidental use requests. It doesn't in any way supersede board policies or any state or federal laws or any laws requiring how transactions must be processed. In the cases of incidental use of NCTD's right-of-way, it does require a competitive process unless there is a justifiable basis for a sole or single source. So, for example, if you have a electrical crossing, we don't have to go out for a competitive process to have a crossing. It also, the procedure establishes the various methods for determining fair market value. So with an appraisal, is it commensurate with the highest and best use of that property? It goes on to explain survey requirements. So we have to have a survey that's signed and sealed and performed by a licensed surveyor in the state of California. The administrative policy and procedure also outlines the process for FTA approval if it is required. As explained at our board retreat, we only have 5 parcels that are encumbered by FTA funding. Those are along the Sprinter lines, 4 on the Sprinter line and 1 at the San Luis Rey Transit Center. As part of the incidental use request, all divisions at NCTD, applicable divisions, have the opportunity to review and comment on the proposed incidental use. So we do this to ensure that it doesn't conflict with operations or have any safety implications. And it also may include a review and comment by SANDAG, as they are the lead agency for our capital projects. And lastly, it provides guidance for us on just file maintenance and the administration of the various agreements. This is on delay today. The incidental use request, as it relates to the city of Encinitas, they submitted a request to NCTD for use. It goes along the western side of the tracks between La Costa Avenue and almost to Encinitas Boulevard. That's for the city's streetscape project. The intended use as provided to NCTD is for proposed as coastal rail trail or for parking. It's approximately 2 miles of right-of-way, and again, it's along the western side of the railroad tracks. The specific area has not yet been defined. In December of 2018, NCTD provided a formal response to the city based upon the 30% and 60% design plans for the project. And NCTD provided this response, and I'm going to go through some of the significant and material issues that we outlined in our response. One is as it relates to NCTD's property ownership. So the city will be required to enter into an agreement with NCTD for the use of the right-of-way, and that agreement will incorporate any city liabilities associated with any deviations to NCTD standards, and the agreement will require board approval. Our response also explained the preservation of the right-of-way for future uses. So the proposed projects needs to be compatible with the long-range regional planning, and we requested that a consistency review to the regional planning be performed by SANDAG, considering the double-track coastal rail trail, as well as handling the stormwater drainage within that area. That consistency review was provided by SANDAG just last week. We also indicated that any use of the right-of-way needs to consider NCTD's engineering standard drawings, providing minimum track clearance and maintenance operations requirements. So just a little bit about, I'm going to sidetrack here and talk a little bit about our engineering standards. So we actually have two, and I ate my Wheaties this morning to show you. We have engineering standard drawings as well as design criteria for the San Diego subdivision. This was done and adopted by NCTD and SANDAG both in 2017. So these are the guidance that we follow for all of the projects within the corridor. So back to our response on the incidental use request. We indicated from a safety perspective that all of the city's improvements need to be fenced to create a separation between the improvements and the active right-of-way. And then from an operation and maintenance perspective, we reserve and require the unrestricted access to the tracks for inspection and maintenance. That any existing utilities in there, we have our PTC fiber, other fiber optic cable in there, shall all be accounted for and relocated at the city's responsibility. We also indicated that any vegetation planting within the right-of-way has to be within the area that's licensed to the city, and the city would be responsible for maintaining that vegetation, and that the city will need to address stormwater and water issues within the right-of-way. So our next steps at this point is we have to finalize an incidental use agreement that I mentioned that we'll be bringing back to the board. We have to come to terms on that first. So we're anticipating March, but we have to come to terms on that agreement. And we will continue to review the city's project plans to ensure that they conform to our incidental use agreements and our policies and procedures. So that's it as it relates to incidental use. Any questions before I turn it over to Bruce? Okay. It's all yours.
Which button?
Oh, Anthony's getting it. Just one second there.
Right. So for those board members that don't know me, I joined NCTD in the year 2000, worked here until we finished the Sprinter project, and then transferred to SANDAG with the Senate bill that moved our capital program down to SANDAG. So I've worked for some time on this corridor. Yesterday, Matt sprung this on me and asked, Mugs wasn't available to do this presentation, so I was asked to do it at the 11th hour. So it's going to be fairly brief. We look at, when we're asked to review a project, we look at the regionally significant projects that are within the area of the projects in question. So Encinitas has the Leucadia streetscape from La Costa Avenue down to Encinitas Boulevard. So we looked at the regional transportation plan, Alan's, the North Coast Corridor plan that we developed with Alan. We also have a Lausanne infrastructure development plan, which lays out the prioritization of the Lausanne double tracking projects. And then we have the San Diego regional bike plan. And in all these plans, there's coastal rail trail through Encinitas. I just put the covers into, Matt asked me to make this sort of part of an awareness presentation as well. There's a lot of plans. We do a lot of planning at Sandag. So I just put the covers there. One interesting part, this is from the Public Works Plan for the North Coast Corridor. This shows all the projects envisaged in the first phase of the North Coast Corridor program. And again, the Encinitas Coastal Rail Trail is in the plan in the initial phase. Then we have the infrastructure, our Lausanne infrastructure plan. We've got a host of projects currently in design and construction on the Lausanne corridor. One photo there, that's just showing the San Alejo Lagoon double track was brought into service last month. And then, as Tracy said, we spent quite a few years developing this Lausanne design criteria, and it lays out requirements for things like flood protection of the tracks. So one of the national requirements we have is that we design all our projects so the tracks are out of the water in a 100-year flood. As soon as the tracks go underwater, trains can't drive over them. So flooding is an important part of the design criteria. We used to stop trains in Sorrento Valley every year until 2015 when we raised the track there by 5-6 feet. So there's a lot of good information in that design criteria. However, that design criteria is meant for interstate railway. It's more stricter than a city criteria or a county criteria. We go upper level because we're dealing in interstate railway. Sorry. Again, we have the regional bike plan right into 2050, and that has section 7, which gives the design guidelines for bike trails. These are the addresses where all these plans can be found. So we looked at the bike trail running through Leucadia, and at a conceptual level, there just isn't enough room to fit everything in as currently proposed. So we need to advance. We have I believe Linda's getting a planning grant to advance the study of putting the coastal rail trail through Leucadia. We've looked at it at a very conceptual level, and everything just doesn't fit. So we have to figure out a way to make it all fit. And I think that's the task that we'll be undertaking as Sandag, trying to make everything fit. But it's a joint venture. NCTD has their requirements, the city has their requirements, the bike plan has its requirements, the Lausanne plan has its requirements. At the moment, everything doesn't quite fit. And I'm not sure if there's a speaker here from Encinitas. We had quite a long discussion on this last night. So that's all I've got.
So I wanted to make sure that we kind of outline the incidental use process from an NCTD and Sandag joint perspective. That process for us is something that we have to look at for all requests for use of our projects. Our primary purpose is making sure that our transit needs are met in the future. And so to some degree, whether it be the Encinitas Streetscape project or any other project, we don't necessarily care about the project outside of the footprint of what we need to support our operations. We do care about revenue to the degree that we're able to get to gain additional revenue as a matter of incidental use. That should be our priority. Secondarily, if we can get reciprocal benefits, that's something that's a priority for NCTD as well. So this for us is just making sure that we start spinning you up on what our procedures are and how we look at it. We don't look at the project from the perspective of a city. We don't necessarily look at it from the perspective that Sandag would look at it. We look at it from the perspective of our rail operations and property ownership consistent with our board policies and procedures. So just a couple of pieces. The rail trail, the board has already established a policy for rail trail that allows cities to have rail trail creation of rail trails that they maintain at no cost to NCTD. They are responsible for all of the requirements. So that's already covered under existing board policy. All other elements relative to this project are kind of controlling based upon the planned usage in that corridor in the future. So that corridor that we're speaking of between La Costa and Leucadia is planned to be double tracked in the future. So we have to make sure that we have sufficient space to support the double track infrastructure, including whatever culverts we need for stormwater management and things along that line. So once our needs are met and the regional project needs are met, whatever property is available, particularly in this project, for me is available for the city to use within that context, because there's no such thing of being enough space out there for us to build a, do a transit-oriented development or input any other kind of facility that would be beneficial to the district. So I just wanted to make sure we kind of outline exactly what our perspective from a staff and from a transit district's perspective about this requested use of this facility.
Okay, I do have speakers, so if there are no preliminary questions, we'll get right to the speakers. We will start with Leah Bissonette, followed by Robert Hemphill and Annika Walden.
Okay, we have handouts that we're going to be passing around. I thought they were easier to read some of the graphics as handouts rather than overheads. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name's Leah Bissonette, and I'm the president of the Encinitas Residents Coalition. We spoke at the NCTD retreat on February 9th, but there have been many new developments since then, so we wanted to update you. You've already heard that the city of Encinitas is planning to reconfigure Highway 101. And up until this month, the city had been planning on putting in a new sidewalk and some permanent concrete parking pods in NCTD's right-of-way. The city also planned to install between 4 and 6 roundabouts, which would require large incursions further into the right-of-way. That plan is not just about Encinitas. It would impact all the transit in North County. As configured, it would use a large portion of the right-of-way, limiting NCD's options to later install drainage, rail trail, and double tracking, just like we've been talking about. It would deliberately slow traffic, thereby increasing the time for bus and car traffic to transit the corridor. And it would convert car and bus lanes into bicycle-only lanes on Highway 101 to accommodate large biking groups. This is not rail trail. This is conversion of lanes in Highway 101. And it would put pedestrians closer to the tracks. Now, it won't surprise you that those plans are not consistent with NCTD and SANDAG's goals and requirements based on what you've just heard about incidental use policy. So at the beginning of this month, SANDAG sent a letter to the city pointing out these inconsistencies. City and SANDAG staff then worked to craft a plan that would be consistent with the requirements. That plan provided safer setbacks, space for drainage, early rail trail implementation, and space for eventual double tracking. Last night, our city council rejected those changes. That's right, rejected. They stated a desire to move faster, and that from their perspective, the proposal did not provide adequate restrictions on the bike lanes to assure that bikes, again, bikes in the highway, not on a rail trail, could not enter or cross lanes that would now, cars could not enter or cross lanes that would now be converted to bikes only. They suggested that instead the city would make permanent an MOU recently signed with NCTD that legalizes parking in the dirt next to the railroad. Then the city would use that agreement, made permanent at that point, to provide for all the parking it wants in the right of way. If the city can fit all the parking it wants under that agreement, it believes it will not have to make any other accommodations for NCTD and Sandag.
Leah, can you wrap it up, please?
Yes, I have 18 seconds. If the city can fit it all in there, then it will not do any other accommodations. What does this mean for NCTD? I will let my colleague tell you about that.
Mr. Hemphill.
Thank you very much, Chairman Krantz and members of the commission. As I think you can have just heard, the city's plan is now in some disarray. The city has, in fact, established a two-person committee to study the way to fit its parking needs into a dirt parking right-of-way that NCTD has provided on a temporary basis. The city wants NCTD to voluntarily make that arrangement permanent immediately, and then the city will do everything else that it wants with no plans to accommodate NTCD Sandag requirements. That's right. No safety considerations, no interest in a rail trail, no concern about drainage. In fact, there were a number of shocking statements from council members last evening. Statements like, I can stand 2 feet from the railroad when it passes by at Leucadia Boulevard intersection, so why do I need 20 feet of clearance for bikes or pedestrians? The rail trail, which many of us in Encinitas would like, was dismissed as unacceptable by the bike clubs that want to ride in packs on their own lane on Highway 101, and the city council agreed with them. Encinitas City Council can do whatever it wants, except when it needs right-of-way and approvals from Sandag. Giving the city council the temporary MOU for parking in the dirt has made them think that they don't need to pay any attention to the rest of the concerns of the railroads, the buses, or the rest of the county. Please don't give the city a permanent right-of-way for parking or you will have lost all leverage. Provide whatever notice is needed and cancel the MOU right now. You can do it. That will force the city to pay attention to the needs of the county and the serious safety and planning requirements of NCTD and Sandag. The city will argue that they've been working on this for 10 years and they need you to provide right-of-way right now. Why? Because there was a bike accident on Highway 101 in December. That was indeed unfortunate, but San Diego County has one of the highest rates of pedestrian deaths on railroad track in the country. A single bike accident doesn't trump the existing safety concerns related to the railroad. Please tell the city you won't give up any right-of-way until they have a plan, which they do not now have, that improves transit in North County, a plan that includes real equity for buses and cars, and that provides for good drainage, good planning, and good safety. You owe it to the people of North County. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika Walden, followed by Kelly Shea Hinsey and John Abadi.
Good afternoon. My name is Annika Walden. I'm representing Leucadia 101 Main Street Association. The Leucadia 101 Main Street is unified with the Encinitas City Council in support of the expedient implementation of the North Coast Highway 101 streetscape. Leucadia 101 Main Street is comprised of residents, business owners, property owners whose lives and well-being depend first and foremost on the safety of the North Coast Highway 101 thoroughfare adjacent to NCTD Rail Corridor. The North Coast Highway 101 streetscape includes over 10 years of community input. It's true, 10 years. Scrupulous vetting as of October 11th, scrupulous vetting and as of October 11th, 2018, unanimous approval by the California Coastal Commission. Leucadia 101 has fostered full community involvement by working in cooperation with other Leucadia community groups, such as Leucadia Town Council, the Downtown Encinitas Main Street Association, the Seacoast Preservation Association, to urge their respective members to participate in the streetscape workshops. Leucadia 101 also has worked in partnership with city staff to make presentations to various Encinitas community organizations concerning streetscape. Furthermore, our organization has carefully considered NCTD's mission and vision and believe that the North Coast Highway 101 streetscape creates important mutual benefit infrastructure that allows its users to access NCTD facilities that help provide convenient and reliable transportation. These improved facilities include more efficient roadway design, complete sidewalks for pedestrians, dedicated bike lanes separate from motor lanes, improved bus stops for users of public transit with overhangs, seating, and safe Highway 101 crossings, efficient network of sidewalks, crosswalks, and hog pedestrian signalized crossings to promote safe pedestrian use, and installation of street lighting to support nighttime pedestrian use and activities. The North Coast Highway 101 Streetscape also aligns with the NCT vision to build an integrated transit system that enables its customers to travel easily and efficiently throughout our growing region. The Streetscapes plan provides accessibility to all modes of transportation and improves circulation tremendously in our region. We hope that NCTD will continue to work in partnership with its communities and other stakeholders. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly Shea Hinsey.
Hello, Honorable Board, Chair Krantz, and NCTD staff. My name is Kelly Shea Hinsey, and I was speaking before this board in December following the tragic collision of Cardiff 101 Main Street Executive Director, Community Advocate, and Encinitas resident Roberta Walker. Roberta Walker was hit on the very stretch of road on Highway 101 in Leucadia that stands to gain tremendous safety and quality of life benefits from the North Coast Highway 101 Streetscape project that she herself had been a vocal and ardent supporter of. Since I've seen you last, I was appointed to the Encinitas City Council, and at my first meeting, I had the great pleasure to approve an MOU with NCTD to formalize a mutual benefit between your agency and the City of Encinitas. For that, I offer my most sincere thanks to Matt Tucker and Tracy Foster for answering the call of the Encinitas community and working diligently over their winter holidays to show a true responsiveness following a preventable tragedy on our local Main Street. North Coast Highway 101 currently acts as a high-speed thoroughfare lacking the basic circulation, safety, and access that our community requires. It's a white-knuckle drive for autos rife with distraction, discomfort for bike riders and pedestrians, all of which are the NCTD riders as well. This design facilitates more exposure for injury and harm for the most vulnerable users of the road in our community, many of whom are your core riders. I became personally aware of this when my mom transitioned to life in a wheelchair, and my perspective of my corridor totally changed. She became 100% dependent on NCTD to provide her basic transportation and mobility needs. Our city's infrastructure fell short of providing her even the access to the bus stops to be able to get where she needed to go. With over 10 years of community input and also with savings by the City of Encinitas towards this project, local approvals by our council and commissions and rigorous vetting resulted in the design that we see today of the North Coast Highway 101 Streetscape Plan. Over and over, the community has come together to support this plan because of the tremendous safety and quality of life benefits that it will deliver for all users of the road. 10 years ago, this plan was somewhat bold, and now it's the gold standard for community placemaking that we learned about earlier in today's presentations. And it's also smart transportation planning. I had the opportunity to engage with NCTD's long-term planning as a non-governmental stakeholder in the last land use and integration study this fall. And Streetscape integrates the 8 objectives outlined in your study, project outcomes with a focus on corridor-based regional planning. As is relevant to NCT's long-term objectives, Streetscape will take the corridor from a total of 2 safe crossings to a total of 14. Each safe crossing is planned in concurrence with a new off-street bus bays that will provide safe and access off the highway between the east side of the road, our business district, and our beaches. It will allow for first and last mile connections between the bus bays, Leucadia's economic center, and our Encinitas transit station, encouraging more potential riders to opt for transit instead of a single occupant vehicle trip. It creates a safe, comfortable, and welcoming atmosphere for our regional bike share pilot that we're working on together. And it integrates transit with community placemaking that provides clarity of use and a more realistic connectivity with riders' destinations in Encinitas. I thank you for the collaboration that we've enjoyed in the last 3 months with these multi-stakeholder agencies, and I hope that we have more ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Abate, followed by Nicholas Harth.
Good afternoon, Chairman Krantz, board members. My name is John Abate, and I'm a Leucadia resident and business owner. My business is located at 1216 North Coast Highway. I wanted to give the perspective from a cyclist point of view. Obviously, Streetscape is addressing a lot of key issues that relate to cyclist safety within North County. In August of 2016, I was struck by a car while cycling in Encinitas. I was struck from behind in the bike lane, and by just a dint of a miracle, I'm here today. I almost lost my life, and I was within centimeters of being paralyzed. I broke 5 vertebrae. I'm fused in 5 locations in my spine. I had a compound leg fracture. I broke 2 ribs, my scapula, and I punctured my liver and almost bled out on the side of the road. In the time that that's happened, I've taken a great interest in trying to advocate for safer streets, and it starts with cyclists and pedestrians, and we need to do our part, and we're doing our part. In conjunction with that, I joined several boards, become a member of Bike Walk Encinitas, and I am a board member of Leucadia 101 Main Street. I've had the opportunity to work closely with all the individuals and stakeholders involved as it relates to advocacy for cyclist safety and pedestrian safety. My business is located, unfortunately, right on the corner where Roberta Walker was hit. We heard about that. I have a ringside seat to the fast speeds that automobiles travel down this corridor, and it's shocking. City of Encinitas has done a lot to help slow and calm the traffic down, and a lot of things that you've read about in the report as it relates to streetscape. But just to address a couple of issues, the staff had come back to City Council last evening with a proposal that just simply wouldn't work for cyclists. Unfortunately, that proposal would have automobiles merging into the bike lane to get to parallel parking. So with the help of City Council and the community backing this, we hope that we can find some alternative to making this a safe place, because cyclists do belong on Coast Highway. So I want to thank you for your time and understanding. The community is behind this as it relates to cyclist safety and pedestrians, and we want to make sure that our voice is heard. And thank you today.
Thank you. Nicholas Harth.
Hello, I'm Nikki Harth, born and raised Leucadia native, and also a business owner on North Coast Highway 101. 2 years ago, my brother and I opened an 8-room hotel surf house on the Leucadia downtown district, 1 block north of Leucadia Boulevard. Around the same time of opening our hotel, I joined the board of directors for the Leucadia 101 Main Street as well. My main reason for joining Main Street was to help continue to advocate and assist the forward momentum of the North Coast Highway 101 streetscape project. I find it extremely important that our community better manages the crazy speeds of cars that come down on Highway 101, build infrastructure that promotes bike safety and makes our town more accessible to all community members. At our hotel, we like to promote alternate mobility around our town, walking and biking. We have a fleet of beach cruisers for our guests to use, and we recommend that they take them to cruise their town slowly so they can see everything we have to offer. We do have sharrows through our entire town, but we always recommend that they ride on the sidewalks, because there can be cars coming down going 50+ miles an hour. We also promote the use of the coaster in their transit system, so that way they can make it all the way up to Oceanside and down to downtown San Diego for Padres games without having to get in the car. Along with improved bike safety, we finally get sidewalks, which is currently not the case. The improved sidewalks and crosswalks help with pedestrian mobility and accessibility not only to our downtown areas, but also to NCTD bus stops and facilities. Being born and raised in Leucadia and seeing it as being my forever hometown, it was wonderful to see the amazing changes that have happened in our town. Most of all, how almost all the businesses on the 101 corridor are still locally owned and have local investment to make our town as special as it is. But still, to have the same road infrastructure through our town as we did 30 years ago when I was growing up, that doesn't fly. I believe it's time for Leucadia infrastructure to finally catch up with the destination that it's becoming. Our guests come from all over the world, shopping, traveling, and exploring our laid-back lifestyle. I look forward to seeing the City of Encinitas, the NCTD board and staff working together to not only to make Leucadia safe, but like our town motto says, to keep Leucadia funky. Thank you.
Okay, that's all the speakers. Board questions.
I have a question. I'm just looking at a Google view of the train tracks coming through Leucadia or Encinitas between the La Casa and Leucadia Boulevard. I noticed the train tracks are pretty much in the center of the right of way that the NCTD has. And it'd be nice if we'd had a graphic of this, but if we're going to double track that, how much are we going to have to move the current tracks one west or east, or are you able to double track with the existing footprint, or how's that going to work?
There's three starting points. At the Encinitas station, the second track has to be on the east side because the west platform's already built. And so there'll be a bridge coming across Encinitas Boulevard, and the track will be on the east side. When we get to Leucadia Boulevard, again, there's a very sharp drop off on the grade as you go to Coast Highway 101. So the most likely location is 15 feet east of the existing track. But a track shift may be needed there because there's a large amount of water coming out of the city into the right-of-way right on that corner. As you get down to La Costa overhead bridge, again, the track's pretty much in the center of the bridge span, so we have to shift the track across 5 feet and then lay the second track next to it.
I guess it'd be nice to see, current track layout and then future track layout, so we know how much right of way is really going to be used and what's left over.
Yeah. So we were moving towards providing that. The city, the city's changing their plans a little bit. So we're not it's not even at the stage for us. And so for us, right now, we're just relying upon our standards. So our standards dictate how much right of way that we have to reserve. We also know we have to account for the drainage facility, and we also have to account for the maintenance access that we need there. But until such time that we either advance our project or the city advances their project, or concurrently, what I think the best option is in terms of completing the study to look at the corridor holistically, it's tough for us to really understand because we're not that far along in terms of the actual engineering for the improvements related to the railroad.
Oh yeah, and I guess I don't really have any qualms with what Encinitas is trying to do, but we have to protect our right of way, make sure we are able to accommodate the double tracking of the track. So
that is my total focus.
Okay,
that's
thanks.
it.
Yeah, I can assure you that it's been protected. He's, the process has been quite challenging, and I think that Matt's done a good job. Any other questions? One of the things that didn't come up is that we're also building a grade separated pedestrian crossing between Encinitas Boulevard and Leucadia Boulevard, just to add a little more complexity to the projects that are underway. So there's a lot going on in this stretch, and I appreciate the support of SANDAG and NCTD staff. Board Member Jenkins.
So just in general, as it relates to, hold on here. Incidental use. So NCTD would not give up any land if they had a future use for it. Okay. And as far as liability, can you address if there was land giving up for incidental use, can you address any possible liability that might come to NCTD from that? And could there be absolutely any cost to NCTD?
So our agreements would protect us in those cases. So any deviations, and I'm just going to give the example of fencing as an example. So if our standard is 6 foot high fence and the city chose to instead use a 4 foot high fence, that would be a deviation, and they would accept all responsibilities associated to any issues that would come up as a result of that deviation from our standards.
And they would also own all liability for their specific use. So i.e. they create, i.e. whether it be the rail trail in the facility itself, or whether it be a parking facility that they would create, all of that liability associated with that would be owned by the city.
Okay, so something comes up, we know everybody gets sued. So what happens if something happens on this incidental use property and NCTD is named?
Well, we would tender that over to the city of Encinitas.
Okay.
Board Member Edson.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for all of the speakers and staff for the presentation. I'm living in the city south of Encinitas, and It's part of my walk. It's part of my bike ride. My son lived in Leucadia and right there off of 101. And I eat pizza there all the time at, you should see my Facebook page. There is a real need there for safety. It's quite clear that something needs to be done. So I just wanted to mention that having eyes on the ground and having seen it for 25 years since I've lived here, it's an area that needs changing. And I look forward to what's brought before us finally to review helping that happen.
Vice Chair Feller.
Thank you. I would just say that every city that has Coast Highway running through it has their challenges, as long as it doesn't interfere in any way with the operation of NCTD.
Very good. This is an informational item, so there's no vote required. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Tracy and Bruce.
So Kim Hayford is going to provide an update on our bus optimization plan. We sent out some letters to cities related to bus stops that we had identified for removal. I got some feedback from board members, so I felt like it would be good just to put it on the agenda so that we could give everybody a big picture explanation of what we're attempting to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim. You ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
All right.
Thank you.
Everybody's
Good
looking for you to
afternoon.
be quick and brilliant and brief.
I can be quick and brief. Yes. Good afternoon. As Mr. Tucker said, I'm here to provide an update on. So bus stops are the location that passengers board and alight the bus. We have over 1,800 bus stops in NCTD service area. All new bus stops or updated bus stops are required to be ADA compliant. So I included a picture here so that you can see what that means. ADA compliance requires an 8-foot wide or an 8-foot deep bus stop pad, a 5-foot wide pad so that a person in a wheelchair can get on and off the bus using the lift once that's deployed here and maneuver around. So NCTD does have standards for bus stop design. These were approved back in 2013, and they're included in NCTD's Bus Stop Development Handbook. They pertain to bus stop spacing and the provision of bus stop furniture. And typically, we base this on population density. So in denser areas, we're going to have bus stops that are closer together. And then based on utilization, if we have bus stops that have high ridership, we're going to provide more amenities at those stops. And I will preface that with not only do we look at the ridership at a stop when we're considering amenities to place there, but we also look at surrounding land uses and facilities. So if we have a facility such as a senior center or perhaps an adult daycare center for persons with disabilities, we would look at providing a higher amenity of furniture at those stops to serve that population. There we go. So these are a couple pictures of bus stop furniture on the left. You can see this is a bus stop bench and an ADA pad. And then on the right, we've got our standard shelter, bench, and trash can. So the goals of NCTD's bus stop optimization program are to really right size the system. We've got a lot of stops that are spaced very close together. So we're looking at consolidating those stops and then making improvements to the stops where we currently have furniture that needs to be replaced that's past its useful life, or adding furniture and ADA compliance to stops that have high utilization. So we're currently in the first phase of the bus stop optimization, which involves elimination. At this point, we're proposing 92 stops. And again, those are stops that have low or no ridership, and there's a stop adjacent to it. So the stops are very close together. And all those stops are also not ADA compliant. So they don't have that bus stop pad that's required. The second phase will be additional consolidation or elimination of stops based on those criteria. And the third phase will be making improvements to bus stops that do have high ridership, and funding for that will be requested in future capital improvement program cycles. We will be working very closely with the cities through all phases of the bus stop optimization program. As you're aware, almost all bus stops are sited in city or county right-of-way. So we'll be involved with the cities at both the planning and then the implementation process. So this is just a map to show you that these first 92 stops that we've proposed for elimination are really spread out throughout the service area. They're not clumped in one area. So it's really throughout the service area that we're looking to consolidate our stops. And so I wanted to go through the methodology that we used. I've got two examples here. The first is in Escondido, and this is a stop that's located on Broadway just north of Escondido High School. And as you can see, there's just a sidewalk. It's not ADA compliant. There's low ridership at the stop, and the stops next to it are actually 800 feet away. Our bus stop standards say that bus stops in an urban area should be 1/4 of a mile apart, which is about 1,300 feet. So our bus stops are too close in this area, which is why we're going to recommend removal of this stop. And then on this slide, you can sort of see in this graphic on the left side, the very middle is the location of this stop that we're proposing for elimination. And these maps sort of show walk sheds of what the impact would be to folks going to origin or destinations in these areas. So we're proposing eliminating that stop that's yellow. The two adjacent stops are above and below it. Those are in that green color. On the left side, you can see the impact to folks accessing origins destinations that are highlighted in the yellow that are 1/4 mile from the stop. And then on the right side, there's virtually no impact to anyone who's currently within 1/3 of a mile away from that stop. The second example, this is in Oceanside on Rancho del Oro, just north of Highway 76. And again, we've got a stop just around the corner that's 500 feet away. This bus stop there's not even a sidewalk here. There was no ridership at this stop last fall, so it really makes sense to eliminate this. The next slide will show you. So the stop is up at the top there in the yellow that we're proposing to eliminate, and then right around the corner to the left is the other existing stop. So these are located on an abandoned field, and it just makes sense to consolidate our stops at this area. So transit agencies are required to review any major service changes for Title VI impacts to disadvantaged communities. The FTA requires transit agencies to set their own standard for what a major service change is, and the board adopted a policy number 30, a few years ago that defined a major service change as 25% change in or more in service characteristics. So route miles, route hours, number of bus stops, for example. And so with these 92 eliminations, that only makes up 5.5% of NCTD's bus stops. Therefore, it doesn't qualify as a major service change or needing a Title VI analysis. So the public notification for the first phase, as you're all aware, we sent letters to the city managers and with a copy to you as well to advise them of the stops that we're proposing to eliminate. We've got a little bit of feedback and we've done some follow-up with the cities to clarify what our methodology was. I know we're still planning on having a meeting next week with the Solana Beach staff to make sure that everyone's clear on what's proposed and that NCTD is aware of any recommendations that they have. And at least 30 days before we eliminate the stop, NCTD will issue a press release. We'll be posting notification at each of the stops that are proposed for elimination, and we'll also be posting this information on our website. And the notification on the stops will have the phone number of our customer service center or email so that folks can call and ask or make a comment if they have any concerns. And then on April 7th, we will bag and discontinue the stops. And then through the next 2 weeks, our facilities contractor will be removing the poles and the signs. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have no public speakers. Board Member Edson.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So do all 92 stops being proposed to be eliminated, are they all ADA and compliant?
Correct.
Okay. And were considerations in choosing these stops also taken into account for schools, access to schools, disadvantaged communities, and geography?
Yes. So when the methodology that I showed on the slide, we really looked at not only the ridership at the stop, but what's surrounding the stop. And there were schools, for instance, that stop I showed was just north of Escondido High School, but there actually was another stop just south of that one that was closer to the school that would still provide access to the school. So we looked at schools, we looked at multifamily housing. We really wanted to make sure we weren't impacting any community that we wouldn't want to impact.
Well, thank you. And I thank you for answering the questions. And also I understand the need for the district to improve performance and to make transit friendlier from a time perspective. So we'll see after the meeting. Thanks.
Board Member Patel.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. If we could reference slide 299, that's the difference in design for the amenities that are provided for each of the bus stops. So while we get there, my question is, what is the cost differential for the design in each of those? Just because in terms of, I mean, one really great example is while I was coming on over here, the weather these days is not conducive, and those individuals that are utilizing, let's just say, buses only for their transit, if it isn't amenable to taking it, how are they going to get to where they need to be? And I think that obviously the designs are very different. There's a stark difference between having a bench and then having an actual covering where you can actually take shelter while waiting for transit. So I just want to know what the cost differential looks like, and then how we can actually roll that out if we wanted to as a board to each of the stops that we have that might have enough ridership.
Right. So I'm going to answer it in reverse a little bit because
Go for it.
yeah. Because first, I agree with where you're going.
Okay.
We were talking about, particularly for our bus system, where it's primarily transit dependent riders, that there's no dignity in having to stand out in the rain to catch a bus. And so the standards that we've adopted, that every transit agency has adopted, we have to look at that differently, because if you want people to ride the transit, if you want them to have a certain level of comfort, we're going to have to improve the amenities at all of these different bus stops. So my overall comment would be, we need to rethink the whole standard process, but obviously standards do matter in terms of you don't want to put facilities where people don't ride. And so if you're going to have a standard that says we're going to upgrade all of these to a standard of what I call ride with dignity, then you're going to want to make sure that every bus stop that you have is absolutely the right bus stop.
And I would, if I may interject, I would say, and I had made a note, it could also be that people are not utilizing it because it's not conducive, right? So I feel like we really want to make sure that as we continue to move forward, that we're being proactive in that front. And I agree that we are starting to make those steps in the right direction, but I just want to make sure that we don't continue to see decrease in ridership because we're not moving in that direction.
Right. No, and I think, and I'll give the example because we started this years ago, because I rode the 101 just for sightseeing one day, and it's 80 something bus stops in each direction. And you could clearly see where somebody's mom called in and said, Billy Bob wants to get off at this part of the beach, and somebody stuck a bus stop sign there. And this is not new to transit. It happens all over the place where somebody says, hey, give me a bus stop, and a bus stop is putting in a location and established permanent. What we're trying to do is to start with the easy, low-hanging fruit and get there over time. But the truth of the matter is, we got to make transit a lot more competitive and a lot better, and the quality has to be up.
I agree.
And so to do that, this is the easy step. And so I would tell you as board members, if you squirm over this, you're going to really be squirming later in the process as we really get down to the consolidation and the optimization so that we can raise that quality. Because I believe by raising that quality, that's where we're going to get that higher benefit of people actually riding the system, because they're going to have the amenities that they need to protect them from our environment, give them the information that they need to be able to ride the system. I think the cost of a shelter is about 10 grand. So that's so the cost differential between that and a bench is what, under $1,000, and the shelter is about 10 grand. So I was going to answer your question as well.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Feller.
I noticed Del Mar's not living in the love here with eliminating bus stops. So is there only one bus stop there, or?
At this point, none of those stops met the criteria for the first phase. So essentially the spacing.
They can't have more than one bus stop because it's only a mile long.
There are actually 6 bus stops in Del Mar.
Well, they need to be eliminating some of those. I wanted to know what is very close.
So as we said, our standard is a 1/4 mile. So very close would essentially be anything less than that. And that's again prefaced by what's in that location. So are there facilities for seniors? It's every stop we have to look at that specific site, but as a guideline, it's a 1/4 mile.
So that's one lap around the track, which isn't really too bad. Maybe for Jim Desmond or I have a couple of, there's Capistrano Drive. We eliminated the bus service out there some time ago. There's at least one bus stop. I think I let Anthony know or somebody that has there's no bench, just a platform and a cover. And then there's another one in front of North Terrace School. I don't know if that's a problem to eliminate, but it's probably shelter for the school kids. But I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is building all these shelters, even though it's kind of a nice thing to think about, but in a lot of places, it's just a place for people stopping and resting. So is that a bad thing? I don't know. And I also would like to know about who dumps the trash in each city.
Okay. You asked a whole lot.
Most of it was comments.
Well, so, okay, because in terms of the shelters, where we have bus shelters, I don't actually, we're far from having too many shelters. In your particular city, particularly out here where the school is, the facilities are horrible. And it's something we've actually mentioned to the city that we have to figure out better facilities for these kids that are going to this school. And we have to include that as part of the provision as the city continues to intensify its density. So I will just park that there as an issue. We've worked closely with your city. Your city has been an absolute wonderful partner in terms of the trash. I believe your city handles the trash under agreement. Most of the agreements that we have are like 50-50 cost sharing agreements as relates to trash, or something along that line.
Yeah, it's very based on the city.
Yeah.
Some cities are all, some cities are.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Board Member Jenkins.
I have 2 questions. You mentioned about you evaluate the land use around the bus stops. Let's say the land use changes. Do you go back out and evaluate? If there's a request, would you go back out and evaluate?
Yes.
Okay.
And we typically get requests from cities to look at new developments. And at that point, that's when we provide our bus stop development handbook and make a requirement as to whether we need a pad or additional furniture at that stop.
Okay. And then my other question is, you mentioned low ridership. What's the definition? Is there a definition of low ridership?
So for this phase, none of these bus stops had over 16 average daily riders. Most of them were under 5. So looking at 0 to 5 boardings a day at a stop.
Okay. Thanks.
Board Member Drucker.
Yeah, just a comment, which is I like the concept of you looking at land use, because we don't want to eliminate a bus stop where a person would have the potential of getting on a bus and they say, well, now it's 600, a half quarter mile away, and all of a sudden it becomes inconvenient. But by looking at land use, I think that becomes really important.
I live in Leucadia near Highway 101, and sometimes I'm ambitious and I walk to downtown Encinitas, but I do it on Highway 101 and maybe catch the 101. And so what I find is sometimes as I get to a bus stop, I'm thinking, well, will there be a bus coming before I can get to the next stop? And if you're taking stops away, it's going to be more challenging to when you're between stops. Are we looking at the policy, the operational policy about hailing a bus? If there's someone who's walking to a stop and they're not there yet, we're reducing stops so that it makes it a little harder to get to those stops. Are there going to be any operational considerations?
Not on the 92 that we're talking about. This has the 92 bus stops that we're talking about has nothing to do with people who are running late to get to a bus stop. Bus operators are trained. If someone is coming to the bus, you should always stop it and wait. If the bus is already in the motion of pulling out, the bus operators is going to continue pulling out because it creates a unsafe issue. And if they can stop and rebirth the bus, they will do that. But this has zero to do with that.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you for the presentation and the letters. And we'll move into item number 17. Mr. Tucker will introduce the monthly intergovernmental affairs reports.
Yes, so Richard Harmon, our state representative, is going to provide a presentation. It's a potential NCTD sales tax initiative. This came up as a topic of discussion at the board retreat. And I wanted to have Richard come in and provide some information to the board so that you guys would be in a position to provide feedback and direction to staff. Richard.
Thank you. Richard Harmon with Townsend Public Affairs, the district's Sacramento advocate. I will be expeditious in moving through some of this. Got a little bit of background to go through so we can get to some key takeaways and then the next steps, but really want to make sure we set the stage. It was actually a pleasure to see most of you at the board retreat. Thanks for having me there. I thought it was very informative. Look forward to the next one. As most of you know, under state law, cities and counties are allowed to impose transactions and use taxes, often called add-on taxes, to the state sales tax of currently 7.5%, so long as that rate doesn't exceed 2%. State law has also been amended a number of times to allow different entities to also impose taxes, and one of those that is relevant to today's discussion is SANDAG. So a couple years ago now, Assembly Bill 805 by Ms. Gonzalez-Fletcher changed state law for us here in San Diego County in that it additionally authorized MTS and NCTD to propose their own tax measures. And the method it proposed for that was the board of each entity could approve an ordinance that called out several different things, including the nature of the tax to be imposed, tax rate, purposes. The bill said, these are for transit purposes and strictly, related activities, term of the tax, and then an expenditure plan. Once one of the boards approved that, it would be forwarded on to the county so an election could be called. So what we're going to talk about is actually a couple different instances that are related in recent years on taxes. So as many of you know, November 2016 ballot, SANDAG had Measure A. Bring this up. This was an estimate of $18 billion over 40 years. And actually, I think about 42% of it would have been allocated toward transit type projects. Basically, the way these work, issue bonds, and the taxes that are then coming out of the repayment method for those bonds. Funds are deposited into a special fund, and Measure A, like many county measures, actually had a pretty broad array of activities, so projects, programs that could be funded from it. These included local infrastructure projects, included regional corridor projects, and of course here in San Diego County, many different corridors, active transportation projects, open space funding. A critical one as you're talking about different projects that require environmental mitigation, so you can plan for those activities. It allowed for transit operator funding and then a variety of grants program. So a lot of different avenues for transit to benefit from a measure such as this. So as well in Measure A, it told Sandag, hey, you know, want to make sure you're leveraging, you know, local, private, federal, state, other resources. Required a 2/3 vote of the Sandag board to basically amend certain provisions. And it also required all the agencies that would be receiving funding to maintain their current level of funding for those programs. At the state level, we call this maintenance of effort. Make sure that, you know, new tax dollars aren't supplanting anything that local agencies should already be paying for. It had several other provisions, including timeframes for when some of the larger projects would be completed. Specified here some of the corridors as well as transit and rail improvements, specified those timeframes for completion, as well as utilizing local workforce, so 80% to 100% local workers on capital projects, and that, you know, workers be skilled and trained in the process. Required oversight. Again, most measures require oversight of the program. Would have become effective November 9th, 2016, and operative on April 1st of the following year, 2017. So this tax would have required a 2/3 vote of the electorate, so 66.67%. And as you all, I hope it's not a spoiler alert, failed countywide with only 58% and 42%. So failed by about 8 percentage points from passage. So some of the background information we wanted to provide was a breakdown for the cities within North County Transit District service area. So here you have listed cities. We have both the number and the percent. As you'll notice at the bottom, there's the county-wide total. In this instance, none of the cities within the service area actually achieved the 66%. I think there was one that was right at Oceanside, right at 60%. I'll move. The other example I wanted to just point out, it's related but different, was last year's Proposition 6 on the ballot. This was clearly in response to Senate Bill 1 that was approved. You know, $5 billion annual for transportation purposes. We look at about $700 million annually for transit, increased taxes on gasoline, as well as a vehicle license fee increases. Have listed a couple of the programs relevant for our purposes, state transit assistance, the transit and intercity rail capital program, as well as was mentioned earlier, solutions for congested corridors and the funding per year for those programs. Funding's adjusted annually. So proponents submitted the ballot measure, which became Proposition 6, that would have basically repealed SB 1, would have reduced all the ongoing revenues we just described. Proposition 6 only required a majority vote to repeal. Statewide, 57% of voters rejected the measure, 43% in favor of the repeal. However, in San Diego County, as you likely know, narrow, but 51% in favor of the repeal and 49% voters against. So this next slide again points out the cities within NCTD service area and the number and percent associated with the results. A little bit of a mixed bag, but as you can see, California and San Diego County difference there. So in terms of key takeaways, 2/3 supermajority vote, very hard to achieve. This would be required for NCTD if it were to propose its own tax. For MTS, Sandag, as the numbers we just looked at show, North County voters opposed Measure A, voted in support of Proposition 6, more or less, to repeal. One of the key takeaways is a measure authorized under Assembly Bill 805 for NCTD will be much more narrowly focused. I mentioned that as for transit purposes, as well as strictly related activities, which is different in scope to something like Sandag's Measure A, which included, as we mentioned, a variety of funding programs, a variety of different types of projects to sort of solicit the votes, more support from the voters. And based on those numbers that we just looked at, the challenge then is for a transit-only tax, particularly in our service area. So I think it's the final slide, just sort of some of the options from those takeaways is direction on, pursuant to state law now, advancing a district-only ballot measure. There's definitely pros and cons. It's narrowly focused on the district's priorities. However, you're looking at a smaller voter base. There's a potential to support a future SANDAG ballot initiative. Here, there's a balance. You got to balance a broader array of stakeholders and what they're looking for in a measure, as opposed to just what the district's looking for. But there's benefits in terms of a broader voter base and bringing in those different components, like folks who like highway projects instead may vote for it for the highway project component, as well as a focus on receiving increased funding from federal, state, local sources and discretionary grants, which is very positive. However, we don't control what sources are out there, when funding's available, et cetera. So that part is out of our control. I think that's my last slide. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. No public speakers, board comments or questions. Mr. Board Member Franklin.
I just want to be on record saying that I oppose a new sales tax. We're the 7th highest sales tax burden state in the country. Voters thought Measure A was focused on roads, which most voters would have been more inclined to support a tax that improved roads, even though it was a minority of the funds that were even intended for roadways. So, I'm a fundamental believer we have to live within our already large tax base and not continue to raise taxes on people for a limitless number of new and excellent priorities that government has for people with a finite amount of funds that we have to tax from people. So I just want to be on record saying I oppose it, and I hope we don't proceed with a measure to put a tax on the ballot.
Thank you. Board Member Drucker.
Yeah, great report. From these statistics, it's obvious that if we were to present a tax increase to the North County voters, it would go down in defeat pretty badly. So it doesn't make sense for us to, I think, to pursue this at this point at all. SANDAG is going through some major changes. Obviously, they're going to be doing totally different regional transportation plan. We just need to piggyback on, I believe, with them, what they're going to be doing, where they're going to be going, and see what they have to do, because that will, I would hope, would give NCTD a much better transit plan and more focused transit.
Board Chair Feller, or Vice Chair, I guess I promoted you.
What? I'm in concurrence with both Dave and John, but we have been told really clearly to me that that they would probably, if we just said roads, would probably be maybe, but with transit only, it won't work. And I know in MTS they're trying to put a ballot on initiative on the ballot, and everybody down there seems excited about it, but I don't know if that's a different makeup of people, but it is just not how North County works at all. So,
Board Member Desmond.
I guess this is at staff. In the staff report on item 17, there's not one mention about any discussion at this board meeting today about a potential sales tax initiative. So in the future, if we're going to do this or have this presentation, it should be part of the agenda item. I don't see it as part of the agenda item at 17, other than you telling us it's going to happen
today. So I'd like to have the heads up before we have this type of presentation or discussion.
Okay, we can do that and we'll try to be better. But this was just a discussion that was raised at the last board retreat.
Then agendize it.
Okay, but let me finish. So it falls under the Intergovernmental Affairs report, and all we did was simply present the information and results of the election. Staff has never proposed a ballot initiative. Staff has never, and I'll speak as staff as me. I think I've consistently said I do not believe that we could pass a sales tax. But I think more importantly, on top of that, I've always advocated that this board and this region needs to do a better job of advocating for the existing dollars that are available at the federal and state level to support our operating needs. But
Well, I'm okay with having the discussion. I just want to make sure it's agendized properly, that before I come into a meeting and that I know that we're going to have this discussion. And quite frankly, there's nothing in item 17 talks about a sales tax proposal.
this is not an action item.
All right, don't stuff it. All right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Board Member Edson.
I think it's important in what you presented, talked about Measure A, and Measure A was more of a balanced approach that had a little something for everyone. It had roads, it had transit, and it had mitigation of natural resources and things for the environment, but it still didn't pass. So I don't know that if you make it all transit or make it all roads, that you aren't still going to have the same problem. If with a balanced approach, it still didn't pass. So it's a bit of a conundrum. Just my comments. Thanks.
Okay, I think that it's pretty clear that we don't need any more.
Right, because I know this has come to staff a couple of times. What I would say, then the board should be opting in on the third bullet. The third bullet is focused in on seeking sources of funding from discretionary sources and from funding sources that are available to the state, from the state. And so what I'm saying on this, we need the help of our board members to be able to bring home the bacon. That's the point that I will drive home as the executive director. We as staff can't do this alone. We need our elected officials to write letters, to make phone calls, and to advocate strongly on our behalf to help bring home the dollars that taxpayers have already committed to the transportation program. So we need to get you guys actively engaged, making the phone calls, meeting with stakeholders to influence them. Key example, Delmar Bluffs. We need you guys to be making those phone calls to encourage people as they're setting up the STIP for the transportation program, that dollars get allocated to support that need. Locomotives, same deal. We'll be meeting with the Air Pollution Control District. We're going to be asking for funding. We need your help. We need you to send letters. So this is where I assume we would end. And now the journey begins for us to get greater participation from our board members to help bring home the bacon.
Board Member Franklin.
I'd be more than happy to make some of those calls. While I hate new taxes and I'll never support a new one, I firmly believe in fighting for our share, for our taxpayers, for the funds that they've already sent to Sacramento to come back to us or to Washington. So let's figure out what you need from us. Give us each 2 or 3 phone calls to make, draft up the letters for us, and we'll sign them and let's do it.
Right, because I'll give you just an example and then I'll be quiet about it. Last cycle of TRCP cap and trade dollar programs, Metrolink got received $1 billion. We received $60 million. Now, I was happy for the $60 million because this actually makes a meaningful difference to us. But guess what? That $1 billion takes care of every single project that we have on both of our railroads if we got the $1 billion. Okay? And that $1 billion opportunity is going to come up again in a few months. And so we just need to be ready, and we're working on it as staff, but we do need that active engagement from you all.
Board Member Jenkins.
So many of us are new up here. So to tag on to what John said, maybe you can help us out, tell us what you want us to do. And
We will,
however you
yeah,
need.
we will absolutely.
Okay, very good. With that, we will move on to item number 18. Speaking of the Del Mar Bluffs, we're going to get an update. We've been seeing a lot of collapses, I assume in large part due to the rain, but wanted to get us up to speed.
Do we want to wait for? Okay. Just asked what I'd ask. Right, so when I joined NCTD back in 2000, the first job I had was to prepare the Del Mar Bluffs geotechnical report. And we are still using that document today. As what we attempted to do was we looked at the bluffs and we looked at what we needed to do over a 20-year period, because at that time, in 20 years, supposedly there would be a tunnel. So now we're 18 years down the line, and there's no sign of the tunnel yet. So how do I get this to click over? So as you can see, the study area is from Powerhouse Park in Del Mar down to the Torrey Pines overhead bridge. The railway runs on top of the bluffs along in this area. We've had a very wet winter this year. We've already had our annual rainfall. And so 3 areas in particular of the bluff have been, the face has been sloughing off the bluff. This is an example. One area is at 10th Street. And you will see the photo in the newspaper. They get up there with a drone and they take a photo this way and they look back and it looks as if the tracks are right on the edge. There's actually about 40 feet there between the edge of the track and where those slides are on the face of the bluff. The next area is, a couple of weeks ago, we had a slide at 12th Street. In this area, there's piles that have been installed at the top of the bluff near the tracks. We've put about 200 piles in the bluffs. So those piles run from Powerhouse Park down to 11th Street. Actually, I'll go on to a slide. This is the slide that happened last week. This is right at the north end of the bluffs near 14th Street. Now, what's happening here, you can see where the piles are. The pinkish dots show where the line of piles is. These official slides are getting a little bit close to the piles for comfort. We'll go on to the next one. So this just gives a summary of what we've done out there. So as I said, we started off with the geotech report in 2000 that prioritized, it looked at how the bluff would retreat, and it prioritized what areas we needed to do first and what we needed to do. As the bluff retreats at up to 6 inches a year, the geologists looked at the stability of the slope and they told us, right, these areas, these are the most, how do we call it? The high priority areas. So we started in the high priority areas and we worked our way along. We did an emergency repair in 2000 when we had, like this winter, we had a wet winter and we had a slide very close to the tracks. We went in and put piles in. We then did a drainage study. The major threat to the bluffs is drainage, is water. So making sure we maintain all the drainage structures in good order is a very high priority. And then we put in a landslide warning system, which was intended to be in until projects 2 and 3 were done. And that we basically put a wire along the front of the bluff in the highest priority areas, that if the bluff slid, the cable would indicate there was a slide and we would stop the train service. We're currently working on Del Mar Project 4, which is in permitting, and then we're planning projects 5 and 6 over the next 5 to 10 years when we can get funding for them. So this is just a slide to show, this was the emergency repair in 2001. Down at 8th Street, there was a retaining wall up on top of the bluff, and in a bad storm like we had this week, the whole thing just slid down the face and the edge of the bluff was very close to the tracks. So we went in there, we went in at night and we drilled piles down 50 to 60 feet, 3-foot diameter piles with giant steel H-beams inside them. And they're spaced at about 10 foot centers in the area near 7th Street. This map shows the high priority areas that we've done and that we're planning to do in the future. So the green areas are what we did in Del Mar Project 2, the yellow in Project 3, and in 5 and 6, we're looking at doing the blue areas. Again, it's not the whole bluffs because in some places there's a lot of room between the tracks and the edge of the bluff, so it's not needed everywhere. So as I said before, there's about 200 piles down through the Del Mar Bluffs area. So in the short term, we've got Bluffs 4 update. In the midterm, we're looking at what we're calling our 2050 stabilization plan. And in the long term, there's tunnel options being considered. For Project 4, we're repairing drainage structures. We're putting some piles in to maintain access and to support drainage structures. We've got a budget of $3 million. The preliminary engineering is complete. We've got environmental clearance from the FTA. We've got a coastal permit last week. We've got Regional Board and Corps of Engineers permits still outstanding, and we're hoping to be in construction in the fall. This is an example of one of the drainage structures that has collapsed on the beach. We'll be putting soil nail wall on the face of the bluff behind where the pipe is and casting a new head wall on the bluff. It's another example of these tow protection walls that act to stop the sea from eating away at the toe of the bluff. They were built in the 40s and they're in need of repair. So all we were going to do is we're going to replace the supports on those walls. Then we've got this drainage chute built in 1912. We haven't got enough money to replace it at this time. So all we're going to do is we're going to cast a block of concrete around the outlet so it doesn't fall over. So that's Project 4. The medium-term plan, we've been tasked with what do we need to do to get us to 2050, which is the regional plan planning date. And so the bluffs are going to retreat up to 6 inches a year. We're going to need to stabilize the old drainage structures like that chute. We're going to need to repair all the seawalls. Ultimately, in Project 6, we want to do bluff tow protection. And then we've got some choices to make. We either put in more piles and tiebacks, a lag between the piles as the bluff retreats, or we stabilize the whole bluff face. We're estimating $70 to $90 million to do that work. In Del Mar 5, our basic aim in Del Mar 5 is to increase the seismic stability of the whole length of the bluffs to an acceptable level by today's design codes and replace some of the old drainage structures. We have estimated we need about $3.4 million to design and get environmental clearance on that project before we go out and look for construction funds. We've applied for, or we're in the process of applying with NCTD for a State of Good Repair grant with the FRA. And I think we're asking for $24 million, which will be design and construction. But the urgent need is to get the design started so we can be shovel ready. And then Project 6, this is the Coastal Commission asked us, well, what are we doing about sea level rise and bluff retreat? So we said to them we would go away and look at it and we'd come back to them with a plan. And they've actually conditioned this work as part of the permit for Project 4 that we work with Del Mar on access, Del Mar City on access requirements, look at how we can stabilize the bluff face and provide pedestrian access. And again, we're looking to start the design of that project as soon as we can get $6.6 million allocated. Long term, I'll be very brief on the long-term plan. I'm an engineer, so I'm not in the planning department, but the long-term plan is we've looked at alternatives for a tunnel when we designed the bridge at the fairgrounds. We wanted to make sure that there was no wasted work would be done when we replaced the bridge at the fairgrounds. So our executive director said, look at tunnel alternatives and see if it affects the San Dieguito bridge replacement. So that was the purpose of this study. They looked at 5 alignments at a very conceptual level. This sort of summarizes the results of that study. The Camino Del Mar tunnel is basically a cut and cover tunnel under Camino Del Mar to run through the center of town. It has the longest travel time 6 minutes, and it's the least expensive at $2.5 million. There would be considerable disruption to the city. $2.5 billion. The straightest way through is to go straight from Bridge 243 straight across the Sorrento Valley and go under Rose Canyon with a board tunnel. The estimate there is for a double track tunnel. And so that would take almost 3 minutes off the travel time. But again, we're looking at large sums of money. So the next steps, we want to secure funding to do the 2050 coastal study. We're permitting project 4. We're going to prepare the 2050 stabilization plan. We're trying to secure funding for project 5 and then design funding for project 6. And again, I would just repeat what Matt said. We'd appreciate help when we apply for these grant funds from board members to help motivate the state and federal elected officials to help us.
Thank you. And when the bluff collapses, we shut down the rail line and we get in.
Leighton and Associates, they've been the geotechnical engineer of record since they did the Del Mar Bluffs geotech study, and we've had them on our team ever since then. They're the most knowledgeable on the bluff geology. So they send a geologist out to inspect the bluffs. Typically what happens is the lifesavers will call in. They will say, there's been a slide. Then we'll send the geologist out. They'll look at it. They'll make a report and a determination, and then train traffic will start up again.
Do we start bus bridges right away, or how does we assess that?
We start the process because as we've learned, the worst thing you can do is wait for an hour to start the bus bridge, then actually need the bus bridge.
Yeah.
So we start immediately planning for the bus bridge, and then we make a determination as we're planning whether or not just to cancel the bus bridge.
And if a train was northbound leaving Sorrento Valley and headed headed north, and this incident happened, would it stop and sit in place, or would it go back to the station? How do we?
That depends. So we have within our operations control center, we've set up an entire service management integrated function. So all of those operational decisions are made between rail dispatch and service management functions. And that I couldn't give you an answer today because I would have to know the specific incident in event.
Yeah. Any other questions? Board Member Desmond.
Thank you. On this 6.6 million, this is to extend the service life till 2050. What's the current service life?
This is for the design.
This is just for the design.
Yeah.
Okay.
Communication to project 5, 3.8 million.
3.8.
And so we have a good deal of the now. We should have the rest of it after July 1. I sent a communication to the state today asking them to provide the additional $5.2 million for $10 million. We want to advance the design for 5 and 6 immediately, so that 5 can go to construction as we continue to work through the process. I know where you're going in terms of the 2050 useful life.
Yeah.
So I'll say it. I've already raised I think I've raised questions of the entire day that I've been here about how do we get to a discussion at the time. And I think the history of it was kind of it was kind of along the lines of potentially, it appears to me, more of a political discussion of a tunnel rather than the practical construction of a tunnel. It is really hard to build a tunnel for intercity freight operations as it exists today, particularly when you're using diesel technology. It's a lower cost alternative is to stabilize the bluffs and make those stabilization improvements permanently. There was and is, from my perspective, sufficient room to do double tracking as it exists today. The great thing is, as Sandag advances planning for the tunnel, they have to complete alternatives analysis. I doubt you get past alternatives analysis and get close to a tunnel. as the actual project that would be implemented.
So is there a possible surface solution?
I believe there's
Yeah.
a possible surface.
That's
solution.
project 6. Basically, we regrade the whole bluff and put a retaining tow protection structure on the beach.
But we leave it where it is, as opposed to an option, I guess, that goes through or around Del Mar.
Yeah, we leave it
surface.
where it is. That's
the other
the least.
the only above ground option is to leave it where it is.
I think that's the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. But we need a study to prove that.
Okay, and then right
And-
now the piles are 10 feet apart, is that right?
10 feet apart, they're 3 feet in diameter.
And is there any, so they're 3 feet in diameter, so you're 10 feet apart, what do you get, 6 feet in between them? Or less, I guess.
And they're about 10 feet away from the track.
They're 10, so then there's no, they're just vertical piles. There's no cross or horizontal reinforcement at all.
No, that's the lagging. So
That'd be
that's
the lagging,
that's
okay.
in one of the future phases is that what the design life is, the geologist has said, right, this bluff is going to retreat at up to 6 inches a year. It's not all going to happen in the same place. There's going to be some here, there's going to be a block there, a piece over there. But as that happens, we didn't think it would happen as fast as it's happened now. We've got 3 places here now where it's moved in the last 6 months. So we need to have a design shovel ready to go in and put lagging between those piles that we can put in the next couple of years.
So once it recedes to the piles, is that sort of like it can't recede anymore? We have to either stop operation or put the lagging across.
No, the piles will support the track, just doesn't look very nice.
But the piles are not even under the track.
No, but they hold the soil back.
All right.
It's designed as a, yeah, we're building a giant retaining wall.
Okay.
So to make it, relatively permanent, what we need to do is stabilize the face of the bluff. We need to put tow protection on the beach, plants or whatever in the bluff face so that it's not eroding with the rain and the wind, and put additional drainage structures out there to control the water. That's the idea.
For your information, the previous supervisor also advocated for Dutch-style barges out in front.
A bridge, yeah.
And so there was this other alternative that he was always advocating. So
I don't know, I'm still gonna
you want to
cross
pick
my
up that
fingers.
mantle? Yes.
Yeah. I'm
Board
gonna
Member
cross my
Franklin?
fingers as I go over that thing.
So there are also, Supervisor Dixon, there are also some of the piles have tiebacks on them. And
What
so
does that mean?
there's
I don't know what a tieback is.
you drill a hole 30, 40, 50 feet into the ground, put a steel cable in, grout the cable into the ground.
Ah, okay.
So part of the long-term plan is as the bluff retreats, you put more tiebacks in and take the lagging further down. But that was the favored solution 20 years ago. I think there's a better solution than that, and that's what we're going to try and do in Project 6.
Okay.
It's going to be heavy lifting. It's not going to be easy to get it through the environmental process. I've got.
Board Member Franklin, okay.
My question.
Okay. Board Member Edson?
Thank you. So I catch the social media feeds from my community and from Del Mar because we're next door neighbors. And there's discussion that the train is causing part of this faster erosion. Yes. Do you think that that's the case? Because there's other sections of bluff in Solana Beach, we're still having bluff failure. We don't have a train that's on our bluff, so I'm not seeing it there. So my question as a geologist is the train making a difference, in your opinion?
Well, we have a section in the geotechnical report, which I could send you a copy of.
Thank you.
But we plan in Project 5, we wanted to actually do a site-specific vibration study. But what we know is when we did the first piles in the emergency repair, we sent a geologist down. Well, he volunteered to go down that hole, 50 feet down in a cage, because he wanted to personally view the strata before we poured the concrete in the hole. And trains were going by, and he said he didn't feel or notice anything. But that doesn't to say, but there is some vibration when a train has a flat wheel, a freight train with a heavy load, then you will get to vibration. But I've walked along these bluffs for 18 years and I've never felt a train go by. You hear it, you hear the sound in the rail, but because you've got a continuously welded rail, the vibration is fairly minimal. But again, we will do a specific study in the next study.
So do we give Bruce a ticket for trespassing or?
I always got a flagman with me.
He's about to get cited. So I did want to say, Tony and I had talked, and what we're going to be offering for board members and other key stakeholders is a site tour on April 13th. That's an absolute work window date. And so we're going to be inviting all key stakeholders, all people who have money, and our board members and other interested parties to come out and walk. We actually, as a staff, went out this week. We were under, all of us are road worker protection trained, but we also had a flagger with us who was in charge, and we did a site walk. And I thought it would be really good for all of the elected officials to be able to see, because you can also see kind of the historic deterioration of the bluffs from, call it 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it is significant when you look at what has occurred over time. So we do think it's important for you to be able to see it and visualize it. So we'll be sending out a communication and invitation asking folks if you want to be able to attend that. But it should only be 2 to 4 hours maximum.
I think
probably it will be, because we need to do it at a time when the beach has receded.
Tide's out.
Yeah. Low tide. Yeah. Yeah. We need to do it at low tide for sure. Yeah.
I think you should make an opportunity for Chairman Krantz to go down in that protected bucket.
You'd have to drill a really big hole though, you know. I get claustrophobic.
They're big piles, 3 feet.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions? Board Member Drucker.
Yeah, obviously huge comments here. If you could go back to the pictures, I think it's slide.
This one?
I can't see the slide 5.
Yeah.
Actually, start with slide 3.
What is it of? Is it of?
It's a picture of between 10th or 11th and 12th. 11th and 8th, I'm sorry.
Oh. No, it's the
Keep
one.
going. Right there.
That one.
That area there is between 11th and 8th Street in Del Mar. That used to be 50 feet wide. When I first moved to Del Mar 32 years ago, that was 50 feet wide. You can't walk that any longer. There's a spot that's only maybe 6 inches wide at this point. So go forward. Keep going. As you can see, there's piles there. If there were no piles there, this would be extremely unsafe. I mean,
Yeah, we'd have an emergency project if there weren't piles there.
yeah,
Right now.
This is not good. I did walk it, and it's almost unwalkable. It's becoming almost unwalkable. There's a spot there just to the north. I mean, just to the south, there were some emergency repairs that were done. Those emergency repairs also are sliding away. So there's some other problems there. So keep going.
Yeah.
Okay, stop there. This is where the train fell into the ocean in 1940. Freight train fell in, killed a couple people, the engineers, the 2 engineers. What's interesting about this is that is all cinders there. That is not bluff. That's an old creek bed, and they filled it in so that the train could run on a horizontal path. So this, this is not bluff that was the problem. It's cinders. My comment at this point is putting piles at the propping up the bluff face is not going to solve anything, because most of the erosion here is due to irrigation. And that irrigation water is going to continue to slough off the bluff no matter lagging is probably the only thing that we probably can do to ensure that the tracks stay on the bluff. Obviously, Del Mar will be pushing for a tunnel, and we'll be pushing very hard for a tunnel. The tracks just don't belong on the bluff any longer. Originally, the tracks were not on the bluff. They were actually on Stratford Court. And in 1910, some people decided to make the town Del Mar the center of Del Mar, where the train station is. And they said, well, to do that, we need to put the tracks on the bluff. And they basically had to fill it in with a bunch of cinders and stuff like that, because these are old creek beds, is where a lot of the problems are. And, you know, the track at this point just doesn't belong on the bluff. So that's my comment.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, then we will head into closed session. And I was remiss in not welcoming General Counsel Winfrey back. Great to have you. And if you would now take us into closed session, I would appreciate it.
All right, so the board's going to go into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D4, to discuss one potential case anticipated litigation.
The email came to me. So yeah, I looked at this. All right, it's a legislative report. There's nothing in here. And that presentation kind of surprised
Board is returning from closed session with no reportable action.
Thank you. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report?
Yeah, just one thing. We will be sending out a communication to your city managers, inviting them to a board workshop in March. We have a consultant that's going to come in and provide a presentation about transit financing and financial markets. We thought it would be beneficial for your staff at your cities to take advantage of this presentation that will talk about the financing markets that are available to folks.
Excellent. Anthony, are there any other folks that want to speak under oral communication?
No, sir.
Board members, questions, comments, general?
It's PFM financial management firm. Jim is the same firm that supports Sandag, same consulting firm.
Okay, so yeah, normally we do a little bit of AB 1, 2, 3, 4 thing, but and go around. So anybody have anything to report? Thank you. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
This was officially the longest board meeting in a decade at NCTD.